Manly men. Manly men. Thank you for joining us today. We have a really good episode lined up for you guys today. We have Mark Ameerali, financial wealth consultant, joining us today. Are you on the line there, Mark?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for the time. I know you're a very busy man. We've had to reschedule this episode for a fair few weeks now because you've had an interesting last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, absolutely. We were in the middle of an international move and having a baby and doing all that fun stuff.
Just to give everyone some context of yours and mine history, we met about 3.5, 4 years ago now, I think.
2017, I think it was. So
Oh, even
five
earlier.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, well, look out, there you go. And though it's primarily through professional channels, like during that time, we've entwined some personal exchanges, and I firmly believe that you're a manly man in sense of personal character and values and beliefs, and that you try to instill in your family and children. I know that you're a great provider to your family. You are respectful and loving towards your wife and children, and you fiercely defend them with everything that you are. And I've found over the years that we've known each other that you have a very interesting story, not only with your upbringing, but where you currently reside. And we can get into that in some in depth a bit later. And you've had some fascinating challenges that you've given yourself as well along the way.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's been I don't know how far back you want to start, but it's been a wild ride these 38 years, almost 39.
So, can you give everyone just and go in depth or as brief as you'd like, but just a little bit personal history about yourself and your education, just regarding your upbringing and your family unit.
Sure. I'll start kind of way at the beginning just because it provides some important context. But so I was born in 1983 in New Westminster, British Columbia. My parents had immigrated to Canada in the late 70s from Trinidad and Tobago, which is a Caribbean country. They were both living there and both wanted to have a better life for themselves. And so they came as students on student visas and were studying at Douglas College in New Westminster. And they got married when they were 21. And they started having kids within a year after that. It was a pretty difficult time because they weren't finished their educations. And so my older brother was the firstborn in 1978. And then they lost a child shortly after birth in 1980. And then they had me, and then they had my three younger siblings. And then my father started his education again. So he had five children when he restarted his education, and I was 12 years old. And up until that point, we'd had a lot of support in our church community to help us get by because my parents weren't really able to make ends meet with that many kids. And then later that year, actually, my house burned down in a house fire, which is very unfortunate. And we lost everything in that fire. And my parents being, still, not well seasoned Canadians, they were not aware of their rights. We were actually renting that house from the municipality, so from the government, and the house burned down because the furnace wasn't maintained and it caused a fire with all of us in the house. It was 4 a.m. when that happened. Thankfully, I woke up and smelled smoke and went downstairs and eventually put together that there was a fire and was able to get everybody out before the house completely burned to the ground. And we had lost everything. And later that year, my mom's sister died, and we adopted three of her younger children. So we ended up with a family of 8 kids with parents that my father just finished his education. My mom, actually, my dad wasn't home when that fire broke out because he was out delivering newspapers for my mom because that's how my mom made an income.
Mm-hmm.
And we typically helped her. But the long short of it was we didn't have anything, and we were starting from absolute zero. We had a big family and a lot of support from the church to help rebuild. But that was a pretty defining, I would say, time in my life in terms of the way that I saw how that was handled and what I kind of wanted to be able to provide for my family. And so as I grew up in the Lower Mainland, I I kind of isolated myself a little bit from almost everyone. And what I mean by that is I recognized that my parents were doing their best, but I wouldn't have done things the way that they did things in terms of the way they grew their family and the stress that they put themselves under because of it and the education standpoint. I knew that, I didn't really, having such a large family, people kind of have visions of the Swiss Family Robinson or the Sound of Music when you have all these people and they get along famously. And to be very honest with you, I had some pretty difficult issues with over half of my siblings. I got along fine with my younger siblings, but the older ones and I didn't get along so well. And at that age, I just felt it was necessary to separate myself, distance myself to a certain degree, so that I could concentrate on my own development. And to give you an idea of what that looked like was I was the only child after my sister left with my own room. And the reason was because I kept it immaculate. I did not like anyone else's mess. I did not like anyone else intervening in my space. And so, with 7 other siblings, or 6 at the time, and living in that house, I was the only one with my own room in the house because I just couldn't stand anyone else, for better or worse. So it's not so much. So it's not surprising that later in high school I decided to join the military, and because I was very driven, I was very athletic. I played a lot of sports. I was always, one of the top athletes on the field as a high schooler. I was very into sports, football, basketball, track, and I was a very good student until I wasn't. In my later teens, my parents separated, and that had a real impact on me and my academic performance, my athletics. I started dropping out of sports. I started slipping down on in my grades, and I kind of lost my way a little bit. And thankfully for me, I was able to again put myself in a situation where I had the ability to leave my family drama behind and focus on my own development. And so, from a very early age, from about I would say 8 years old, is the earliest time I can remember these people coming into my life. And this is something that you don't know about me, Mark, I don't think, is we had this family that was kind of like in the background. Like my parents, my grandparents, I never heard from them. They disowned my father when he left to come to Canada to follow my mom to study. And my mom was kicked out of her house when she was 7 years old. I know you knew that part. My mom grew up in a convent orphanage, and so she was a very gifted academic child. So when she came to Canada, it was because the nuns knew that she wasn't going to reach her academic potential in Trinidad. But my dad came to Canada solely because of my mom. And when my grandmother found out, it was because of my mom. She disowned my father. So I never really had any contact per se growing up with my grandparents. And so this couple came into our lives very early on. And I think it was through marriage counseling. My parents' marriage was constantly in jeopardy. And they were connected with this couple called Carl and Olga. And that couple was very instrumental. I won't get far into it, but they lived in Vancouver. The kindly old couple that helped our family, helped
Mm-hmm.
us afford food, and then when my oldest brother went to university, he lived with them because they lived close to the University of British Columbia. And then when I graduated high school and I went to my military training, I decided I wasn't going to go to the military college, which was my first intention. I decided that I was instead going to go to the University of British Columbia. I had a small scholarship that was going to help me pay for it, but I just decided I didn't want to go to school in Kingston. I didn't like Ontario. I'd visited the campus out at the Royal Military College of Canada, and it was lacking. We'll say I found it with a lot to be desired, and so I decided to go to school in Vancouver. And my first year in school, I remember at the end of the very first week, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I essentially lost my way. I knew I was smart enough to go to university. My parents were both university educated. My mom had started her university when she was 16, when I was 16. My dad had finished his, started his when I was 12. And if they could do it, I could definitely do it. So I went to UBC, and my first year, actually I went to a small college on campus at UBC my first year. And after the first week of the first year, I learned that you could study money. That was a game changer for me, because in ninth grade, my first concept of this was, if I could somehow make $1 million and make a 6% return on that, $60,000 a year, I wouldn't have to work. And it wasn't that I was lazy. Like, I was always kind of accused of that because I was always paying my younger siblings to do my chores and whatnot. But it was just I wanted to spend my time doing things that I thought was more valuable to me, and that's something that I maintain to this day. So I figured, if I could find a way to do that, make that million, and then have an income, passive income, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically a very influential concept in my life, is foundational. When I found out that you could actually study how to make money and how money works, I was immediately hooked. There was no other way that it was going to go. So I realized I was in the wrong school, taking the wrong courses, and it was going to take me years to correct this error. And to be honest, I would never have gotten right into the business school anyway. The grade threshold was way too high, and the competition was way too high for my exit from high school when they wanted to kick me out because I'd fallen in with the wrong crowd. I was a kid who was helping egg the principal's house. I had dropped out of my sports. I was slipping down on the honor roll. I was just going all sorts of the wrong direction. I was labeled as a bad kid, and really it was just I was suffering from the fact that I was completely unobserved and unparented because my father was working two jobs for 2 decades and didn't have time to parent us. And my mom wasn't around. So that gave me the motivation when I was living with Carl and Olga, and I saw that goal, and it was 2 years away, and I was like, hey, this is what I got to do. I went from almost failing math in high school at the end to, having to study calculus, having to study economics, having to do English, which is something that I always thought that I couldn't do because my older brother's a lawyer. My oldest brother's a lawyer. He's a very, very prolific reader, very good writer, and I was always led to believe I couldn't write very well because I wasn't interested in reading as much, and I wasn't as good of a writer as him. So I was led to believe that I wasn't very good at it. So these things were difficult for me. School was very difficult for me. Well, in comparison to my older brother, he's very intelligent. Things come very naturally to him. For me, I had to work like you wouldn't believe just to achieve, we'll say mediocre to slightly above average results. And my mom spent a lot of time teaching me how to learn. She ended up getting her education and getting a specialization in special needs.
Mm-hmm.
And she taught us a lot about how to learn, how to study. And so I've kind of taken those lessons and, been able to take what, menial skills I've had and be able to do more than I would have otherwise with them because I've been able to use them and hone them as well as I have. So I eventually did get into university or into the business school, and then once I was into the business school, you actually had to qualify. You had to be one of the top students in the school to get into the designation that you choose, because the way that it worked, and this is just kind of the way that my mindset works. So it was good it was set up this way, is that only 1 out of 8 of the students who applied to the business school got in, and only 1 out of 8 who applied to the finance program got in. So I had to be the top 1 out of 64 students to end up from a non-business student to a finance student. And so that's why when I got into that finance program, people basically believed you were minted. Once you got into this, you were minted because you're one of the top of the top. And the average income for one of these students was triple what the average income from a normal student is. So you kind of walked on water a little bit. People told you this and that. And it was a very competitive program. But I graduated there, and then life hit me broadside to the head. When I graduated, I did my internship, one of Canada's largest banks, in their wealth management division with their high net worth brokers. And I realized very quickly after a few months that I didn't want to be like any of the people that I'd met. I didn't want to work in that type of hyper competitive environment. I was a competitive person, but I saw this as more toxic competition and a toxic environment. I won't name the bank because
Mm.
I don't want any liability.
No,
But I
but
will say that sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say it's superfluous to the story, like
Mm-hmm.
like who you're working for. So I fully respect that.
Yeah. So, but I just felt like, I came, I was living in the world of money. I was a hyper competitive alpha male competitor, totally fine working as a team or on my own, but I just didn't want that toxic masculinity, if you will. And I don't, and I'm not saying masculinity is a bad thing at all. I'm just saying it gets to a point at some times where it's not healthy. It's not a healthy thing to be in that type of environment, because that one-upmanship, it's not really good or conducive to building you up as a real man, right?
Mm.
Because a real man doesn't try to prove how much better he is than everybody else around him. He tries to help them up, right, and help them become better. In my opinion, I'm all for competition. I think competition should drive that, but there's a point where it turns, and it just and that's where it was for me when I was seeing that. So I knew I didn't want to do that. I had visited New York and I couldn't get out of New York fast enough. I thought I was going to be an investment banker. I thought I was going to work for a big bank. I thought I was going to be making all this money. And it turned out that even before I graduated from university, I was already feeling disenchanted with the industry. So in my last year of university, there's a couple of important things that happened. I started a course that taught other people how to invest their money when I was still in university. And that was a huge game changing eye opener for me. The reason I started that course is because I learned through Robert Kiyosaki's books that instead of reducing my disposable income to afford the parking, which cost $350 a month in the bottom of the building for the company that I worked for in that internship, instead of reducing the income that they were paying me to pay for that parking, I was going to expand my means so that I could afford to park where everyone else parks. So I didn't have to walk 15 minutes down from a different building. And so that's what I did. And the way that I decided to do that was I was going to offer a course to other students at the university through what was called the mini school. You could take courses in guitar, which I'd done, or you could take courses in massage or belly dancing or beer brewing or whatever. And so I would theorize that people would take a course about money, and if it was offered. And so I started for the very first time. I designed a six session course in money, and I started teaching it, and it was extremely well attended. Not only did I have art students who didn't know anything about money, but I had PhDs in geology. I had engineers coming in from off campus to take this course about money. And so that opened my eyes to the fact that there was a massive demand for this. People did not know what they didn't know when it came to money, and no one was going to teach them. So they were eating it up. And so that was the very first time I taught that course. And I taught that course 15 years in a row after that. I kept going with it. I kept going with it. And so after I graduated, in my fourth year, I was recruited throughout that year from another large Canadian bank. And when I graduated, they gave me two options. They said, you can either become a financial advisor at the branch, or you can become a commercial banker. And so I looked at the compensation, and I noticed immediately that the commercial banking arm of this thing, the being a commercial banking analyst, was going to pay me much more money, and I wouldn't be at the retail level of the bank, which I had no desire to do. So I ended up taking that job as a commercial banker. It was an extremely valuable experience because it showed me everything I didn't want to do with my life. I would be going to the office, and it was this little glass box in the top of the commercial banking center in Burnaby. And I'd go in, and I was doing this repetitive work, crunching basically credit applications for businesses. And I thought that I was becoming chronically ill because my energy, like by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, was just gone. Like I couldn't stay awake. I was struggling. I really started to think I had some sort of chronic disease
Mm.
because I went from having no problems, putting in hours of study. Like, I mean, I was a late night studier. I'd exercise late at night. I had no problems with energy. But for whatever reason, it's the first time in my life that 2 o'clock in the afternoon came, and I literally couldn't even stay awake. I couldn't go to the gym. I got no energy. And what I didn't realize at the time was that the job was sucking the life out of me.
Huh.
And so what I did, I had this idea in the shower, which is where I usually have a lot of good ideas. And it basically, and I'm not exaggerating this, that idea, Facebook was still just coming up. Like this was 2006. And but back then, if you remember this, there was MySpace and there was High Five. And I had taken, I was like, if you can take that concept and apply it to another platform for an internal communication system, then you might have something there. So I recently joined a multi-level marketing company called Zango. Zango was since absorbed by another MLM company, but they had no real good internal communication platform. So my concept was to basically make a social networking platform for a multi-level marketing company. Yeah, so the long story short is I actually brought that company to the point where I had 27 investors. I was making investor presentations, and I told the bank, I'm starting this little project on the side. I'm not going to spend any bank time doing it. It has nothing to do with banking. There's no competition. There's no violation of my contract with the bank. The day after I told my manager about it, the HR manager from head office showed up and fired me first thing in the morning.
That's
And
crazy.
the reason that she claimed that I was being fired was because of underperformance in my job. And despite the fact that I was struggling to do the job, is because it was so boring, because it wasn't very challenging. And she was telling me that it was underperformance, but really what she was doing was she was telling me without saying it, like, look, we realize that if you're starting your own company within the first 90 days of your working here, and we can fire you for any reason, we're going to fire you now,
Yeah.
because there's no way we're going to keep you for the next 20, 30 years under our thumb. You're way too
Yeah.
entrepreneurial to work for us, right? Is what she was saying to me. And so I'll fast forward to say, yeah, 27 investors. The smartest thing that I was able to do there was limit the amount of their investing, because despite the fact that I did everything that I could, I was not a technologist. I hired someone who was very, very techy to operate the company from a technology standpoint, to build the company. I raised the capital to build the company, but ultimately it went down in flames. Like, it was a glorious flaming ball of crap that went down. And unfortunately, that was a very hard lesson I learned. As a side note, the CTO, the chief technology officer of that company, went on to create what is now TELUS's meta telehealth platform.
Oh wow.
So he's the CEO of a company called Medio that was bought by TELUS, and he is a very successful person in his own right, very technology capable. He was one of those guys at 6 years old who was taking apart computers and putting them back together, and he just very bright guy technology. So we had the technology, and if you can believe it, that company that I built, we had the platform where, if you remember this, back in the early days of Facebook, there was no instant messenger in Facebook. It was all an email system. There was no groups and ability to upload photos into groups. We had all of that functionality in 2007 and 6, right? So it was truly, we'll say, a cutting edge system that we had developed. But ultimately, I was not a Mark Zuckerberg. I had no idea what I was doing, and I told that to people. That's why I limited their investment to a very small amount. And so when that went down, it was sad, but no one was losing more than a menial amount of money doing it. So here I was, 90 days post graduation, no job, fired from my first job. Company went down in flames. I started working at Future Shop selling computers, which is where I started using Apple computers, because I became the Mac specialist. I couldn't sell computers I didn't believe in, so I only sold Macs, and they made me the specialist. And then one day, one of my former not work, school friends came in, and he had just happened to be, he was older than me, but he had come in to the business program a year after me, and I had been his leader in his freshman introduction, program, and one of the we'll say the higher ups in his the leaders in his group. And he told me, and so I was dreading, because this place that I was working at was very close to the university. I was dreading when someone would finally come in and see me working there, because I was embarrassed, right? Obviously,
Mm.
not only was it someone that I knew closely, and someone that I was in a position of not authority, but like in leadership too. But this particular guy, his name is Vince. He was in a wheelchair, and which is it had nothing to do with the story, except for the fact that he told me to pour a ton of salt in that wound, that he had been hired into my job when I got fired.
Oh wow.
And I just wanted to melt into the floor and
Mm.
disappear. Right. And he told me years, and I told him, I was like, okay, you need to watch out for this person, because she will fire you for whatever reason. And he told me, he told me years after that he thought that I had just done something wrong or whatever, because he ended up getting fired 6 months later for the same reason. And I'm like, look, you take two of the top students from the top business school in the area and tell them that they're underperforming. I wonder what's going on here. But the reason I mention this is because he was Cambodian. I'm obviously not Caucasian. And I was like, I wonder if this woman is hiring people for diversity reasons, just so that she can meet a quota.
Hmm.
I'm wondering if this is what it is. And this is one of the and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, but this bank is one of the leaders in Canada for the, we'll say, diversity and inclusion, okay, phenomenon. Not hiring you necessarily because of what you can do, but hiring because of who you are. And so, I since had been banking at that bank for 12 years, for since I was 12 years old, and I'd since completely cut all ties with that bank because I feel like that's what they were doing. So that aside, I graduated. I've been hired and fired. I've run a company into the ground already. I've already had the experience of raising money for investors, and now I'm out on my ass doing God knows what. I don't know where the next step in my career is going to be. So, to accelerate the story a little bit, I started. I decided to start studying again, and I ended up applying for a job, and it ended up being my what I thought was my dream job. And what it was I was working for a company it was a $9 billion company. It was an asset management company. They had two divisions. One division was dealing with high net worth individuals, and one division was dealing with institutional level clients, so pension funds, foundations, and endowments. And so I interviewed for that job. And the long story short is I made it to the last interview, and it was me and one other person. And they told me I didn't get it. And they told me that the woman who did get it was going to start and I was going to be out. And the long story short is she decided that she didn't want to make a move from her current role, and so they gave it to me. So I was like, okay, I'll take whatever I could get at this point, because I was set to start working in the oil sands, because I was like, look, if I can't work in the industry I want, I'm going to go make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Right. And the day that I was going to go and start my safety training to go up north, they called me and told me that I got the job. So I started working at that job, and it was to me like a dream come true at first. I was Because the company had grown from 6 to 9 billion in assets right away, they were bursting at the seams, and so they needed my help everywhere. So I was trading money markets, I was trading bonds, I was trading Canadian equities, I was doing requests for a proposal, I was doing post trade compliance, making sure that everything in the mutual funds were in the balance that they should be. I was doing newspaper reporting for those mutual fund pricing, and I was starting my advanced level education, because they were grooming me to become a relationship manager on the institutional side, which means that I would be the person representing our company talking to, say, the university pension fund or the healthcare workers pension fund, right? And so, long story short is I learned a lot, and I was under a lot of stress and pressure, but I was 23 years old, 23, 24 years. I started when I was 23, 24 years old, and they put me like there was a point where the primary trader was off on vacation, and I was the trader. Like, I was trading $4.5 billion of this company's money. Like, that amount of power was at my fingertips. There was a lot of margin for error, and error did appear. I ended up making one mistake, I remember, where I traded 200 shares of Berkshire Hathaway A's in the morning and then again in the afternoon, and I overspent like $860,000 of the company's money. And it was well, essentially, let's just say I wasn't at that job for very much longer after
Oh
that.
dear.
It ended up being fine, but like at the end of the day, what happened was, like, so my trading assistant, who came over from a competitor, she gave me the trades, and I traded the first one in the morning and then the second one in the afternoon, and I didn't realize it was a duplicate, and I couldn't reverse the trade by the end of the day. And to make matters worse, it was their AGM that weekend, so it was a very volatile week, and the price of the stock thankfully went up, so the client ended up making $40,000 on the trade. But there's a huge amount of liability there, because a trading error, the company eats the loss if there's a loss, right? So that could have cost the company a lot of money. So, but that brought me to a very defining point in my life, and what that was up until that point, I figured that in my life I could achieve anything I wanted to by my own hard work and merit. And but the problem was, you know, despite getting everything I wanted, I was not happy. I was extremely stressed. I was living in an environment I didn't want to be in, and I was starting to hate Vancouver as much as I thought I was going to hate New York. I hate the rain. I hate the cold. I hate traffic. I hate elevators. I hate waiting in lines. I hate waiting for anything. Right. And the reason I started riding motorcycles in the first place was because I wanted to make my 20-minute drive from Kerrisdale to downtown to a 10-minute drive. Right. Because I just did not want to be wasting my life in traffic. I didn't want to, you know, and anyway, so I was looking at this and I remember it was like October 2007. No, it was summer of 2007, I think, or summer 2008. One of the two. I can't even remember. It was around that time, and I just thought, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. If this isn't it, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do with my? I was working in the exact area that I thought I wanted to work and doing what I thought I wanted to do, and I just wasn't happy. I was super stressed. I was coming into the office at 6 in the morning to start my trading day, and I wasn't leaving until 10 p.m. because I'd have to study from 7 to 10 to do my CFA program. And so I just said, God, just direct me in the place that you want me to go, because I don't know what I need to do to make myself happy, but this isn't it. And I just need you to show me what you want me to do so that I can do whatever it is that's going to make me happy. Fast forward, I'll skip a bunch of steps here. That ended up having me continue my advanced education over in Asia. I moved to Korea. I met my wife while working at a university over there, and I finished my program, and then we moved home, and then I started working again, but on my own terms. I started working for myself. I started working buying U.S. real estate, and that's what led me into my most recent positions in private securities. Because when I was buying American properties when I came back from Korea after finishing that program, which is a very high level, globally recognized gold standard program. I had a lot more education, and I came back and I saw that despite all of my efforts to trade options and equities in the markets, I came back from Asia, and the U.S. real estate market had dropped 75% in some areas, and I was able to see an opportunity there that a lot of other people saw, but few others were willing to act on. So I educated myself on how to acquire those types of properties, and that promulgated the situation where I was buying a few. I used trading profits to buy a few houses with a partner of mine, Peter, and we bought a few houses on our own, learned how the system worked, and then we started doing it for clients and starting a little bit of a consulting service for people who wanted to buy U.S. properties. And that led to a company hiring me to create a fund so that people could use their RSPs to buy U.S. properties. And so that's what actually moved me from Vancouver to Kelowna 10 years ago.
Hmm.
Was the company hired me to come to Kelowna to build a fund that would help people use RSP money to buy multifamilies in Phoenix in 2012. And from that, I'm skipping some significant steps here, but in the interest of time, I ended up striking out on my own once again from there, and that's when I became an advisor again, but in private securities, raising capital for um, people who are interested in investing their money off the markets. And our company eventually developed an internal public securities division as well, so we ended up doing both public and private, but being better known for our private securities division. So for the last, I would say from 2012 to 2022, my primary focus was helping Canadians invest primarily in private markets, but also in public markets, and using my background in relationship management and direct experience in private investing to help people navigate that world. And so that's actually how we met in 2017. Was I was giving a presentation that you were at, and explaining to people that there was this whole other market out there that involved private securities. So my history and experience to that point had been very well serving to build my practice in private securities. And I know that's a very long background, but gives you a pretty good idea of some of the elements that have formed me to who I am and what I'm doing today with my life.
No, like I said before we started recording, this is all your content, and I found it very interesting. There were multiple things that I hadn't known about you before, which to me makes your story even more compelling. But can I circle back just to when you were younger and you had this house fire in which your family lost everything? How old were you when that happened, Mark?
I was 12.
Then after that, you had an incident where your family adopted other siblings.
Hmm.
And how old were you when that happened, and how old were the siblings? I guess is what I wanted to know as well.
Sure. Yeah, I was also 12
Okay.
when
Yep.
that happened. They had been working to adopt them for some time up until that point. It was a 2 or 3 year process actually.
Oh wow.
And so I was 12. My oldest, well, adopted sibling was 15, either 15 or 16. I think it was 15. They were 15, 14, and 9, I think, when they came.
Okay. So because when you initially started saying that, I could understand perhaps why your mindset was different to theirs because they had obviously been raised to that age from their biological parents. So
Yeah, well, yes and no. So there's a couple of things. One, they grew up in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, so
okay.
let's just put this card on the table.
Yep.
So my parents are ethnically African and Indian primarily.
Yep.
Okay, so Trinidad is a melting pot between those two, primarily those two ethnicities, because it's 40%, 40% Indian, African, and there's some Caucasian and some. So Europeans colonized the island in 1492. The Spanish had it, then the English had it, and the Chinese came when they abolished slavery in the 1800s. And so there's all of that there, and there's all of that in me. That's basically roughly my ethnic mix. Okay, and I will tell you, even the issues that you have about blacks in America or Canada, you still have in Trinidad. Okay, there's a mentality about the African descent people and their motivation to work versus the Indian descent people and their motivation to work. Now, the Africans were brought over as slaves, and the Indians were brought over as indentured laborers. The agreement was, and I'm not an expert in this, that the Africans came over and they were mandated to work for free forever, and the Indians were mandated, they paid their passage over to this new land with indentured servitude, and there was a certain period of time, and then they were either released or they were released and they owned the land that they worked, right? Or had some assets or the ability to gain assets. So this, I'm not saying that it's Africans by nature. I'm just saying it's the situation that they were in that promulgated this situation where they just have this mentality of work in the way that they culturally that they approach work and the mental space around work. So I would say that, so my adopted siblings have more African heritage than I do,
Hmm.
and they grew up very poor, like my mom, which is why my mom was so hell bent on adopting them, because my grandmother, who is alive to this day, lives in social housing in a third world country. And I'll tell you that it is not a high standard of living,
Yeah.
but it is a very inexpensive style of living. And people are willing to accept a very low standard of living if they don't have to do any work. Right. And that is the mentality that they grew up in. At least, definitely my older two siblings, who were the ages that they were when they were adopted in their mid-teens, they'd already had that mentality ingrained in them, if I
Yep.
said that diplomatically enough, right?
Yep.
My younger sibling, who is 9, he didn't have that same mentality. He was I'm not going to say the complete opposite, but he was very different because he wasn't so indoctrinated into that mindset, if that helps. So to give you an idea, my older brother, who's adopted, very low income in earning job. We'll just say my two older siblings very much followed the patterns of the culture they grew up in terms of family planning, in terms of motivation to work, in terms of end result success.
Hmm.
Whereas my younger brother did not. He owns his own business. He was a 5-year, 6-year veteran in the military. He was served in the armed forces full time as a tank operator in the Armored Corps in Lord Strathcona's in Edmonton. He's now a mechanic. He'd been working on cars since he was 6 years old, rebuilding them when we're in high school. He took a loan from me to rebuild a car one time when we were in high school, and he runs his own mechanic shop now. So very motivated individual, completely different outcome than his older siblings. And they, by the way, were also half siblings. So and none of their fathers were on the scene. It was only their mother, and their mother died.
Hmm. Well, I guess the 9-year-old, he was still in that how would you say it, moldable phase, I guess,
Yeah,
where the 15 and the 14-year-old were considerably older and might have been
yeah,
more set in their mentality and
yeah.
in their upbringing. So, well, so if I get this right, between the ages of sort of 12 and 23, you've got a family unit, you have a house fire, lose everything, you were excelling at sports and education, there was a breakdown in your parents' marriage, you then have to go and fight to get into your college course, and then you graduate, you then run a company, that fails, and then you start managing $4.5 billion worth of assets
Hmm.
by
Yeah,
by
failing
by
your way
by,
to
by
success.
sort of 23.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's just a classic form of like, you go and you fall on your face and you fall on your face and you fall on your face, and all of a sudden you hit something that works
That's
and you're
it.
successful, right?
Even just those sort of 13 to 15 years is absolutely insane. It's almost like you lived enough for a lifetime in just those initial years, and you're
Hmm.
barely a sort of man um, by the time you start managing this huge pool of assets. So
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I wasn't in charge of the assets,
I,
but I was responsible for trading it,
no, I
right?
understand. It's still
It
a
was
huge responsibility.
Oh, it was massive. It was the first time in my life where the stress was more than I could bear.
Mm,
Yeah, I believe it was probably not a great idea for the company to entrust such amount of responsibility to someone who was so young and new, but that's what was in front of me. And I guess maybe that's what they thought I was capable of. And I'll be the first one to admit I didn't think I was capable of that at the time, and I think time showed that I wasn't ready for that at that time.
yeah,
So, but you learn your limits by pushing up against them, right? So, so yeah.
interesting. So not only like additionally to you bettering yourself educationally, you've also authored two books. So you authored, I think your first one was Common Sense, 12 money lessons you should have learned in school.
Hmm.
And then you went on to author Perfect Sense, which is 15 key lessons to financial freedom.
Hmm.
Now, what what was the motivation from like to publish those books? Like, did that come from when you were doing that mini school financial course that you offered, and the interest that you had from that? Like, where did that motivation come
Yeah,
from?
I will tell you exactly where that came from. So you're 100% right that the content had come from the course that I had been teaching at the time that I started writing that book, the first one, Common Sense. I had been teaching that course for 7 years at the time. So remember, I said I taught it for 15 years consecutively. Didn't matter whether I was in Canada or Korea or back in Canada in Kelowna. I was teaching that at the local university. I go to them and say, hey, would you like me to teach this course? And invariably they'd say, yes, this is a need for this. And so what I got from that was I was finding, and tell me if this makes sense. I was finding that I was dealing with such a range of backgrounds and understanding because I wasn't teaching a contiguous or homogenous classroom. I was teaching
Mm,
18-year-olds to 30-year-olds or whatever, right? And all of them had their previous either misconceptions or backgrounds in education and money. And so what I was finding was two things. One, I was finding such a variety of background that I wanted to create some sort of common denominator between everyone in the class and work from there. And up until that point, I was recommending different reading material that they should read in preparation for the course or during the course. So if you know the book, you know that it uses a passport system, and I create different visas in the book, and I say this is a level 1 book that you should read. This is a level 2 book that you read, and there's about 20 to 30 books that I recommend building a foundation on how to understand money. And those are the books that I'd been previously using snippets of those books to make a foundation for people. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, if I can make one book that says everything that I wanted to say for the class and the curriculum, I could start everybody from the same point, and we can have much more of a discussion about it instead of me trying to teach them the content in the class, right? And I got that concept from the Khan Academy. So Sal Khan, I saw his in 2007, I think, his video. He had a TED talk on how we have the education model inverted. I thought he had a great point. He said everyone comes into class with varying levels of understanding, and then you're trying to educate people that are like the problem I just described. He said what we should be doing is sending them to get this common level of understanding from a on their own time, and having them come back to us with their questions for where they get stuck, right? That way you're meeting every student where you need, instead of delivering this one size fits all lecture that some people get and some people won't get, and they won't ask questions, right? When I was a student, I was always sitting in the front in university, not in high school. In university, I was since I was motivated to be there. I was paying for this. I was making sure I was getting my questions answered. I was at the front of the class, and if I didn't understand something, my hand was up, because I
Yeah.
learned that most people aren't going to ask a question when they don't know, because they don't want to look stupid. And I have no problem saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't understand this. Can you please explain this to me?" And most people would be, they come up to me and they, "Oh, I'm so thankful you asked that question." So I was thinking, why didn't you ask the question, right? But just that's not people's nature a lot of times,
No,
right?
well, I struggle with this. I'm much more open to it now, but when I first started working in a corporate environment and I became sort of like a middle manager where I managed a department of like 5 or 6 guys, and then I was introduced to the corporate managers meeting where you'd sit around a corporate table and you had the heads of all these departments, I wouldn't say boo. Like, even if I didn't understand something, and it took me a while, until probably took me a couple of years into that role before I said, well, no, I am going to ask a question because it is going to it's going to directly affect my job and my decision making on the best outcome for my department, and hence the business I was working for. And now I've accepted that I'm not a professional and I'm not an expert in every field. And so if I'm talking to an accountant, or if I'm talking to a financial advisor, or if I'm talking to a mechanic, I will ask the dumbest questions because I need to, because I don't know. So
Yeah.
I think that takes time to build. I mean, and if you had accepted that early, then you should be all the better for it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very, I mean, it's humbling at first, but when you get used
Mm,
to it, like you're a blank slate and you just say, okay, yeah, I don't know anything about this. I mean, it's funny with all the education that I have, and I'm doing some new things down here in the States, and being obviously in a new country, in a new environment, there are certain assumptions because of my background in education that people know or understand that I would know certain things. I say, look, I mean, this is not something that I've ever understood before or learned before, and no one has ever said, "Oh, you should know this" or anything like that.
yeah,
I mean, it's a little bit. I mean, if you start early, when you actually don't know anything in your early 20s with that blank slate mentality, no one's gonna to think poorly of you, because you're not supposed to know anything when you're that young.
correct. Yeah,
And if you continue that when you're older, you've learned a lot, and B, so there's less of a need for you to ask. But when you do, you've A, gotten used to it, and B, like, people know that you know a lot, and the fact that you don't know this particular thing isn't an affront to them. They're like, oh yeah, I'll just tell you how this works, right? So it's a good habit to be in, and I think those who engage with things they don't know actively are going to learn a lot more. So when I was like, getting back to the writing of the book, this is another thing that you may not know, is I started the book in August of 2011. No, yeah, August 2012. Sorry, August 2012. Working for a company, the company that brought me up from Vancouver to Kelowna. Okay, and I was in Chicago, in a hotel room in Chicago, and we were at a conference for buying multifamily buildings in Chicago. So this company would have conferences in the United States and teach Canadians how to buy U.S. real estate. And so the long story short is that we were in in Chicago in August and Orlando in September, and I was writing the book. So the book took 2 months to write, through August through October. In the middle of it, we were in Orlando and it was September. And I remember this because when we left, I'll skip to the high points of the story. I realized in August in Chicago and confirmed in September in Orlando that this company was not only not teaching people the right things about how to buy cross-border real estate, but they knew it and they weren't going to correct it because they didn't want to lose face. And so I confronted the situation in Orlando when I confirmed that that's what was happening. And I saw blatantly put very illegal practices going on in terms of the way that they were raising capital. They were contrary to the SEC regulations and the OSC regulations. And when I got to the point where they said, we are not going to change what we're doing, and I saw that the investors and the clients were about to lose tens of millions of dollars because they were following bad advice, I blew the whistle on the company and emailed every client not to do what the company was advising them to do because they were apt to lose money. And by the time that I got back home from Orlando, I had a $5 million lawsuit waiting for me.
Oh, wow.
And so, needless to say, I was fired from that job. I was not only fired and lost my six-figure income, but I then had to spend every dime I had to defend myself in the lawsuit, countersue the company. And I was writing the book simply to distract myself from all the stress that was going on. My health had declined after years of chronic stress. And I completely ran out of money. Like when I say I completely ran out of money, I had to borrow money from my father, which was a very interesting dynamic because my dad and myself had a very rocky past, especially when it came to money.
Mm-hmm.
I had to borrow money from my father so that I could pay rent and not have to declare bankruptcy, because I knew that if I declared bankruptcy, it would severely impact my ability to do any future work as an advisor, because that's one of the things that you always have to declare as a financial advisor is, have you ever declared bankruptcy?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it could have taken away my entire livelihood for the rest of my career if I did that. So that was what was at stake. And I was fighting for my life. And add to that the fact that we were found out that we were going to have a baby. So it was a very, very stressful period in my life. But that was the context in which I wrote that book. And it took me 2 months to write, because that's all I did was write the book.
Yep.
So, but I knew exactly what I wanted to say because I'd been teaching it for so many years, and I knew how I wanted to say it, and I knew the visuals I wanted to use because I used all of them in my courses.
Yeah.
Right. So it was ostensibly a very simple exercise that kept me distracted to produce something valuable during a time of essentially crisis in my career.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, because I remember reading, I think you mentioned in the preface of Common Sense that from concept to publish, it took like 6 months.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, 2 months to write and 4 months because I had to do the graphic design of all
Mm-hmm.
the stuff. And my first book, I was very nervous because I was borrowing so many concepts and referring to so many authors. I was very careful to give those authors their credit and cite them.
Yep.
And I tried to reach out to the authors after it was done and make sure that I had their approval. And that's actually how I became friendly with David Chilton. Actually, we have a pretty good rapport going on for a number of years because he'd written the Wealthy Barber, and I was referring to him before I actually even started writing the book. I'd reached out to him to ask him why he hadn't updated his 1989 book. He had written new editions, but none of them addressed some of the key issues that I wanted to address.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually called him in 2011 before I started writing the book in 2012 and said, hey, why didn't you do this and that? And like, why didn't you update this in your third edition? And he said, I'm actually writing a whole new book right now. And so I waited until he released his second book to see what he'd say. And he didn't
Mm-hmm.
say any of the things that I wanted to say. So the point is that I spent a lot of that last 4 months editing. There's 9 versions of that book. So I went through constantly and refined and adjusted and updated. And at one point I had like 20 or 30 working copies to other people who were reading through, making sure there was no errors.
Yep.
And no mistakes, because I was paranoid of being called out as like a failure or fraud
Mm-hmm.
or didn't know what I was talking about, or being sued by citing someone that I shouldn't have cited without their permission or whatever, right? So yeah, but then I finally got it produced, and I delivered a couple thousand copies, 3,000 copies, I think, to print. And that book was actually when I transitioned out of the former job with the company that I was in litigation with, and started my own practice, because that was obviously the context I wanted to start a new practice in, moving to Kelowna, not knowing anybody, being sued, having no money, about to have a baby. Let's go start our own business here and try to make money as 100% commission, investment professional. That was the context that I wrote the book and produced it. And that book was pivotal to launching my career in the new role. So it was very well timed, the release of that book, because I hosted a big book launch party at this art gallery and invited a couple hundred people, and the newspaper covered it, and it ended up kind of blowing up and being a big thing. So
That's awesome.
that's what launched me. So yeah, and I mean, and at the end of the day, I had a thriving business 8 years later, and the company that I was suing had been raided by the securities commissions and shut down and put under cease trade. It looks like we know who came out on that one, looking like they were doing the right thing versus the wrong thing.
Absolutely. So you had I think it was, from my memory, Mark, 12 to 18 months ago, you had an interesting challenge that you set yourself, which was it delayed gratification you did for a month?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is the Exodus 90 program I did. It would have been 2 years ago. It's a 3 month challenge that is it's yeah, I mean, delayed gratification is a part of it, but it's a program that is done. I only know it in the context of Catholic men's groups, but but yeah, it's a Catholic program that I did, and it's in during this period of time. Actually, it's Lent, so just before Easter. It's the 90 days before Easter. And what it is, it's a program, what they call it, an asceticism program. So you're stripping away different things in your life in the effort to better appreciate them and better appreciate the things that you do have, and just train yourself to become better by the recognition of the value of the things that are around you. So that program entails things like cold showers. You can only take cold showers for the 90 days. And the reason it's 90 days is because that's how long it takes to build a new habit from whatever science they're referencing on that. You're not eating in between meals at all. On 2 or 3 days a week, you're reducing your food intake by about 50%. So you're only eating 1.5 meals total on those days. You're required to do certain amounts of exercise, certain amounts of contemplative prayer, certain amounts of reading, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty doable for if you have the right mindset. I would say the biggest challenge in doing that is the cold showers. A lot of people, really, that's the first and foremost thing that they that they find uncomfortable.
Oh, I can totally appreciate that. What were some of the things that you gained from that time and that challenge, Mark?
Yeah, I have to be honest. For me, it wasn't so much what I gained from the exercises, or the mortifications, or the things of the asceticisms. It was what I gained from the relationships of the people I was doing it with. And I say that because
That's interesting.
um, what I really looked at is how much of a change on my life is this really? I don't typically do an hour of prayer every morning, but I'm
Hmm.
doing prayer meditation. I typically was doing more exercise than was already required, which is a big thing for other people.
Yeah.
The eating thing was something that was good. I'd say if there anything that I got from that, was the eating restrictions. So I had already started, we'll say, playing around with fasting. So I had built myself up to that point already where I was doing 72-hour fasts. Periodically, I'd done a couple. 72, multiple 48s, couple 40, 20, 24 hours is not difficult, but not over a period of 90 days, right? So
Yep.
that was showing myself that I could consistently do that. That was an eye opener for me. And but like I said, the relationships that I gained and the camaraderie, like I've always been a very male oriented relationship builder. So, background, multiple sports teams, football, basketball, track, whatever. I was a fourth degree knight in the Knights of Columbus. I'd been in the military for multiple years.
Hmm.
I'd been in an all male group called Junior Chamber International, which is a Kelowna based professional group that was all male at the time for multiple years that I was in there. And I just kind of thrived in that environment, being around men and learning how to be a man. I was not the youngest, but me and another gentleman were the two youngest by a fair margin in this
Yep.
group, and there was seven of us. So that kind of intimate, small group setting, and just learning from the guys that were in their 50s how they're 20 years ahead of me in terms of life experience,
Yep.
and just being able to observe them and hear their challenges and hear their successes and see how much further down the path they are. I mean, I believe as human beings, we don't really have many original thoughts. We learn by observing, and we learn by copying and taking what someone else has done and making it our own or improving it. And so anytime I can get the opportunity to observe what someone else is doing and see how successful they've been and change it to do it the way that I want to do it, it's a huge advantage to me. And that's really what I felt was very, very valuable for me, especially from, we'll say, the spiritual side of things, to see just how much further ahead these guys were than I was
Yep.
with regards to that.
Yeah, I found it very interesting when we just had that brief discussion about it. So, yeah, I I think I could cope pretty well with everything that you were talking about, except the cold showers. I'm sure I'd be yelling the first few that I had, and then I'm
They're
sure
short.
I'm sure
They're
I'd be
short.
screaming like a little girl, bloody murder from the washroom, and the missus would be thinking, "What on earth is going on in there?" But yeah,
Well, you know what I learned in the cold showers in particular is that, especially because of course this happens in the Canadian winter. Like you start in January, right? And number one, you learn just how long you can be in the shower before the water in the pipes in the house run out, and
yeah.
you get the water from the ground. So you learn that. But you
Is
you also learn that, what? It's kind of like life. You do that hard thing when you get, like, when you come out of the shower in the morning in the January winter in Canada. It's usually cold in the bathroom, and you're like, this is uncomfortable. I want to be in the nice warm shower. It's the opposite when you're
Yep,
doing the cold shower,
I bet.
because you're coming out and it's like, whoa, that's warm, right? And so you kind of just take that lesson in life and do the hard thing early, and everything else becomes easier.
Yeah, and where you were living at the time, that was way colder than, me
Yeah,
being in Vancouver,
yeah,
like considerably colder and a lot
yeah,
more snowfall. So,
yeah,
yeah, I can fully appreciate you if you waited, if you weren't able to wash quickly, then
yeah.
you probably had literally icicles falling out of the shower head.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and it's funny too, because I mean, like, a lot of guys would just like skip the showers, and I was never a shower skipper. I'm not a stinky individual to
Yeah.
begin with. Yeah, but I'm not gonna not shower just because it's cold. That's for sure. I found that very interesting that some of these guys were just like, oh no, I'm showering twice a week, 3 times a week.
No, I
It's like,
just, yeah,
no,
but
that ain't gonna happen.
I find it really interesting when you said it really depends on your mindset, because I really believe that the brain is controlling everything else, and if you can get a handle on that, and if you can have a positive mindset or find the positivity even in bad situations, then you really can achieve a lot more than what you ever thought was possible.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, just like I'd say the mindset thing is very apparent, is most apparent in the fasting. Okay.
Mm.
I never thought it would be possible for me. I remember the first time that I was sitting down for a meal with a friend of mine, client and friend. who was fasting that day, and he's just like, yeah, no, I'm not going to have anything. And he told me that he was fasting the whole day. And to me, I was like, I could never do that. And then lo and behold, 12 months later, I was at the point where I was going 3 days with no food. And
Wow.
that's all in your mind. And not
Hmm.
only was I going 3 days, I was exercising hard. Like I was not, there was no point that I was exercising harder than when I was fasting. So, and from an evolutionary perspective, you can understand why that is, because for the however many thousands of years that human beings have been on this planet, we're geared, especially males, geared to find food.
Yep.
So your body actually gets a temporary boost of strength, power, and acuity when you are fasting, because it's helping you find food,
That's really
right?
interesting.
So, I mean, when I'm bench pressing 200 pounds and I immediately notice on the third day of fasting, I get a 10% increase in that strength, right? It's all, this is very measured, right? I just recognize that I measure everything when I'm exercising, and I notice that there's like, for me especially, and the other advantage for me, and this has always been the case, is when I exercise, after I exercise for the next several hours, I'm less hungry.
Oh, wow.
So I was exercising for 2 and 3 hours at a time when I was doing these fasts, and I never felt faint and never felt weak or whatever. I felt better. So, but it's hard. I tell you, like with 5 children now, the most difficult thing you can do, and today is no exception, is put food with your hands into the mouth of another human being and not eat it. Like that is probably, I'm still mastering that one. I still can't do it. Like if I have to feed the kids breakfast, I'm probably not fasting that day.
Yeah. Fair enough. In saying that, like I really do consider you to have a large family. Like you have 5 children and your wife. Most people complete their educational improvement before they start a family. However, you gained a very high financial qualification while you were continuing to raise your family. Am I correct in that, Mark?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's technically, you're correct. That is a true statement. However, I will say that learning from my parents, I knew that I wanted to be what I would call fully educated before I started a family, which did happen. I did my undergraduate and then I did my postgraduate work. So I did about 7 years of post-secondary education before I started the family at 30. However, I'm the kind of person who, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it as best as I can. And I just noticed over some time that I could do a better job in my as an advisor if I had some additional qualifications. So I finished my chartered financial analyst designation in 2010. So just to give you some context, only about 1% of people in the industry are able to achieve that designation. There's only
Mm-hmm.
about 7,000 CFA charter holders in Canada, and so it's a pretty exclusive group. There's an 85% fail rate for that program. They do not want you to pass. It's not expensive to do. The way that they get their prestige is by difficulty.
Now,
Uh,
sorry, Mark, was this like after you did your college business
yeah,
course?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
I'm with
yeah,
you.
yeah. So after I graduated from finance, you have to have a degree to be able to achieve this, right? So
Okay.
it's a postgraduate, right? So I did that, and that, like I said, I was living in Korea. I was studying very hard for it. It's brutal. I'm not going to lie. It is hundreds and hundreds of hours of studying the most mundane. If I didn't naturally love this stuff, there's no way that I was getting through that. I had literally left the country, spent 4 hours a day studying for multiple months, and was able to successfully, you know, achieve the course. I did have one failure one year, which is another story, but I made it through. And but that was finished in 2010. My first son wasn't born in 2013 until 2013.
Yep.
But in 2017, I had been an advisor for several years, and I just felt like my client's complexity was increasing to the point where, while I had the highest level of financial education available on the planet, it didn't give me everything I needed to do that job. And the reason that it didn't, it's not a fault of the program, is because that program is a global designation and it does not address Canadian specific content.
Okay.
So any Canadian, you know, retirement planning or stuff like that, right? So it's, tax and estate and corporate structures, they're completely different, say in the States versus Canada. So you're studying pure financial theory in the CFA charter. So I decided to do the CFP, which is a Canadian based certified financial planning designation in 2017. So my original plan was to do this before my daughter was born, because I had another son in 2015 and then a daughter in 2017, and she was born in May. And so the plan was to do that before she was born. That didn't happen because I was struggling for time and I didn't find very good materials. So it was when my daughter was 3 or 4 months old that I decided that I could get the materials that would allow me to do this. And so, yes, I did do it. And so, to give you some context, that program is typically I want to say 3-year program. The CFP is a 3-year program, postgraduate program. You can integrate a significant amount of it in your university level education if you do it right. Like my associate Spencer, he did it as part of his degree.
Okay.
Right. And then he had to write we'll say the board level certification after he graduated, but he did all the content for the course during his university year. So it's a university level course.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And for someone at his level, you must take the 3 years of education to do it. Right. But at the time that I did it, was lucky, because if you do the math from 2012 to 2017, I'd have more than 5 years in that role. And I had an advanced level designation that was superseded even the CFP. So what they allowed me to do was essentially challenge the course. They said, you can take this course and just take the exam and do the final project, and you can have the designation. But I said to them, okay, well, how am I supposed to write an exam for content I've never seen before?
Yeah.
The CFA has nothing to do with Canada, and this is all Canadian specific. So I started looking at the test and the material, and I realized I didn't know any of this stuff. So while I was graced with the ability to challenge the course, I still had to learn it from scratch because I had no idea what was in there.
Gotcha.
Right. So people kept on saying to me, like, look, this must be super easy for you because you have a CFA already. And I said, well, it's actually not, because when you're learning something for the first time, you're learning it for the first time, right?
100%.
And but here's kind of where the magic happens, and where I say, I put this in air quotes saying that I cheated. I didn't cheat. It's the fact that I did the hardest designation in the world first. So yes, I know how to learn, and I know how to learn fast. So my mom was visiting when I have a baby born. My mom is a teacher, so she comes over and she's helping. I took that August, and I sat in my office in Kelowna, and I took 1 month, and I learned everything in that course. I just sat down and burned through it in 30 days. And then I wrote the final challenge test, which was ironic because the way that I wrote it, I'm not to toot my own horn, but I wrote it more complex than the grader could understand, and they failed me on it because they didn't understand what I wrote. So I dumbed it down and resubmitted it in a different case and had to redo that, which was a very defining moment. I'm going to say in my life, and here's why. I had 3 kids at home, all under the age of 4.
Mm-hmm.
I had in my office, I'm not shitting you, like 12 to 18 hours a day working, running my business, and studying to burn through this course. And then I get through it and I fail. I fail that final thing. And I had the moment, I had a real 2 or 3 days where I was saying to myself, look, you've gone through and you've learned everything you need to learn. You have the information you need. Why do you need a subsidiary designation to do your job? And the answer is I didn't need to do it. But my pride and my never give up, never lay down mentality was like, no way, I'm going to do what is necessary to submit this thing, write this final exam. And I went to Vancouver for a week and I took a course to prepare me for the final exam. And when I went down, I had not registered for the final exam yet because I hadn't passed my final submission project. But yeah, anyway, long story short is I dug deep, very, very, very deep. And I pushed through another final submission because these final submissions usually take months. I did it in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Submitted another one. I got the word that I passed it while I was sitting in the course to prepare me for the final exam that I was already scheduled to take the next week. And long story short, the test was a breeze. It was easy. It's not difficult if you put that much effort behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then to boot, 2 years later, when I had another daughter who was 3 months old, I decided I needed to do my insurance license. And that is like usually a 3 to 4 month program. And that one took me 7 days. And so usually that's a whole career for some people, 3, 4 months training.
Yep.
And yeah, that took 7 days. So I literally went from the top down to the bottom. Like usually people will start in insurance because it's fairly simplistic, although it can be complicated for some things. And they'll go up to become a CFP, and that's where they stop. And the CFAs are the guys who manage billions of dollars. I started there and worked my way down, right? But the irony is that there's the potential in my role to make more money with the insurance license for the one that took me 7 days to study for. I could make 5 times much more money in a 12-month period doing that than I was with what I was using my CFA for.
That's insane. That sounds crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it is crazy. It's like, I'll tell you right now, I won't name any names, but I'm currently working on a couple of policies worth $20 million that could pay easily 7 figures,
Mm-hmm.
$1 million for a course that took me a week to study for, to get the license for.
Yeah, that.
I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have the call it 10 years of financial education that led up to that.
Yeah.
But that's the situation. That's the value of that designation. That's why I took that week off to do it.
How do you manage the dynamic, Mark, of raising a family versus continually building your career and education? Like, from our conversations, you have a very open dialogue with your wife, and I'm assuming that you would need a lot of buy-in from her, between you and her, to make sure that all of the standards of your family are upkept, along with you continuing this education and career.
Yeah, it's I'll tell you right now, it's not been easy, and there wasn't a lot or wasn't the same level of buy-in originally as there is now.
Mm.
Harkening back to that, I remember way back when we moved from Korea to Canada. Okay, my wife was an immigrant. She's from Ireland. We got married in Korea, and then we did like the civil thing, so I could sponsor her as a spouse to get into the country, which she did a few months later.
Mm-hmm.
And the long short of it is, when she arrived, my wife is a saver and she's a very low risk individual. And that's what served her very well. I mean, she didn't have high aspirations to do much with her career, but she just wanted to live a comfortable life and not have to stress about money.
Yep.
And then she got on the roller coaster, which is Mark Ameerali's life, which I don't think she fully appreciated what that was going to look like. Because you have to understand, when we met, I was living in Korea, I was working as a teacher, I was studying for this program that she knew existed, and she knew it was kind of a big deal, but she didn't really fully understand the world that I came from. She didn't fully understand I was previously trading billions of dollars and lived in the world of high finance.
Yep.
She just knew me as a teacher. And when I was in Korea, I was living a very much more relaxed lifestyle. I never had to set an alarm. I was only working 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day. I'd go and play basketball with my friends and organize races up mountains and go and do all of these things. It's like I was in university again, almost, right?
Yep.
Because we all lived in a confined area and just hung out and had a good time. Korea was excellent for that, and I was just so relaxed. And then we come to Canada, and I remember a conversation we had when she obviously immediately started working right away, but I was not going to find a job. I was going to find another career. I just left my career for 3 years, done my postgraduate education, and I was not about to start selling mutual funds for some bank.
Mm-hmm.
So I had multiple interviews. I was in the 6-month interview process with this one guy. And I remember after one day, she sat me down. She's like, "Hey, I didn't move to this country to support you."
Yeah.
Right? She's like, I have, we had some money when we got married. We didn't have to go into debt for that. But we tapped a lot of our finances to immigrate to Canada, because when we came back, we had to set up life. We had to buy furniture. We had
Yep.
to get married. We had to this, and that, the other. And she was working downtown in an English language school for students doing an immersive training coming over from Asia. and which is a good fit because she was teaching Asian students at the university level in Korea, or more in elementary school. But we were at a university when we first met. So the point is that she was doing something she knew how to do, and she was earning enough of a living to support us. And I said to her, I was like, okay, you give me 6 months in support so that I can figure out exactly what I wanted to do, and I will give you the next 40 years. And then she knew that I was spending some of my time investigating how to invest in US real estate. And she came home one day with, I think they have this still in Vancouver. They have these little free papers. They used to have like three of them, like the Metro and the some red and black one, and then there was an orange one. I remember it was the orange one that she came home one day and she had this article in it about buying US real estate, and she gave it to me. She's the one who gave it to me originally. So I went to their little free day or free 2 hour seminar, and I could see that it was real. I could see that these people had access to these properties. And so I signed up to go to the 3 day course that cost $99,
Yep.
right? And then at the end of that, of course, they're trying to sell you something bigger. And the bigger was $35,000. And I didn't have $35,000, but I did have a partner, my friend Peter,
Yep.
very good friend. We knew each other since elementary school. And I called my wife after that, and I remember telling her, because this is a pressure sales thing. They're like, oh, if I do it today, it's going to be 35, and if I wait till tomorrow, it's going to be 45 or whatever, right? And she's like, don't do this. She's like, do not do that. And of course, I did it. Right?
Yes, I had a feeling from that laugh you did.
Of course I did it. And 80 to 90% of the people who took that course and spent that money never bought a single property.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up, because I was working full time or not working full time, was able to take the program, realize that they didn't know what they were talking about, because this is the program that ended up hiring me later to help fix the program.
Yep.
Learning how to actually accomplish what the information they did give me, navigate the situation, and then I ended up making their unsuccessful clients my own clients and buying into it. So, but I will tell you, in the early days, my wife was, I would say, if I'm being brutally honest, I succeeded in doing this despite her support.
Yep.
And over time, there was some times, through the litigation, and then I had a partner that I ended up doing some real estate with, and we had to unwind that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I get entangled with one of these unsavory characters, I would end up solving the problem, learning what I needed to learn, and using that lesson to go and bring my business to the next level. Because subsequent to that, I ended up acquiring 29 properties with this partner in 24 months with no cash down for most of it. Right. And that's where a lot of our income came through. And then and then we had our other children, and my practice was growing. And then I did this advanced level of education, and then things kept snowballing. And then I got to the point where I was making a very good income passively. And, all of her needs were taken care of. There's only a 1 month period. I can tell you this very distinctively. It was April 2015. When we came back from Phoenix, we were away for the winter, and we found out that my partner that I was working on a real estate deal with had completely shirked his responsibilities. And not only was it going to make the project fail, but it was going to leave us homeless, because it was the project that I was supposed to be moving into in a fourplex in Kelowna. And I had to extract myself from that situation, jettison him from the partnership, sell his equity so that we could finish the project and fix that project. And that project went from almost bankrupting me again and leaving me homeless to, I probably made $500,000 on that project, and ended up being the fulcrum that launched me from having to work for a living to being financially free, which was the
Wow.
subject of my second book, right? And so that, I think, at that point, after 3 kids, because there's some, in the beginning, if I'm honest, like, there's some trust issues. There's some, she's in this other country, she's having
Yep.
these children. What's this going to mean for me? And then, we're talking 2-3 kids in. This guy's obviously never wavered in his commitment to me. He's made good on every single promise he's put forward to me. I promised her that month, you will never have to worry about money again.
Yep.
And she never has. We've never looked back. To get to this point where she's like, I mean, I can tell you honestly, the last 2-3 houses that we bought, she never even saw them before I bought The house that I'm in right now, she never even saw it before I bought it, because she's like, I just trust you. I trust you. So she can, she went from, I would say, my biggest challenge to my biggest supporter. And she hasn't been working since 2013 outside the home. So she's been a full-time mom since 2013. And my wife is a force in herself. So she has a business degree on her own.
Mm-hmm.
She has a specialization in HR and accounting, and she has a teaching degree on top of that. So she, in the beginning, she was doing all the bookkeeping. She learned QuickBooks. She learned how to do the bookkeeping for our businesses, our RV rentals, our vacation rentals. She was doing some of the cleaning for that in the early days to keep us supported, when we had those vacation rentals at the fourplex and in another place. And she's just been very flexible. I used to resent the fact that she had no plan for her life, but what I realized after is that if she had the same type of drive to do the things that I was doing, we would never have been able to see each other. We would never have accomplished anything because we were running so fast in different directions. So having her as like the supporting cast for everything I was doing, and the flexibility and malleability to learn the things that she needed to do to support, whether it be bookkeeping or cleaning herself or coordinating the cleaners or teaching the kids. Like when we take off to Mexico for 4 months or Phoenix or whatever, and she can take the kids with them and homeschool them, like that allows us to live the lifestyle we want. And she's excellent at it. I mean, my kids are unbelievably bright
Mm.
and well educated, and they don't need a teacher at a school to do that. They've got their teacher as their mother, right? And yes, they're in some co-ops here because it helps with the social connection and the community building. But in all honesty, my wife is a fantastic force of nature to have by my side, because I would never have been able to accomplish even a fraction of what I had without her support. So when I need to go through an intense period, like I did some training for a new partnership I have down here.
Mm-hmm.
She just does what she needs to do, and very often without complaint. It's not perfect, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and I think she trusts now, and she realizes that her ability to support what we're doing has enabled us to live incredibly unique lives on our own terms.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you sort of mentioned that she hasn't worked outside of the house. I think it's so critical of at least one parent working in the house with the children. Like that is its own full time job in itself, and I really wouldn't want, um, if I'm not trying to get gender bias here, but any female that is listening to this to devalue themselves if they are at home raising children, taking care of a household, taking care of all the budgets and finance while traditionally the man was out there working, that there should be no feeling bad about that at all. That's
Yeah.
super
Well,
critical.
here, just look at the numbers and look at the statistics for, we'll say, academic achievement, income, future potential from a child who has a constant parent at home, especially if that child is their mother in the early years. That is an incredible advantage. And it's what I would credit with my own success. I
Mm.
remember sitting down with my mom when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, learning how to do math, and her telling me how to space out my math so that I could read back and understand what I did later. And, teaching me how to learn. Like, it was my mother who did that for me.
Yeah. So just
So,
so
yeah.
touching on the homeschool thing, when you and the wife go away for extended periods of time with the kids, was there a period that you and her decided to homeschool the children, or was that based around when COVID started kicking off and everything was like super uncertain?
No, no, no. It was actually far before COVID. It actually started in 2018 when Michael would have been 5, just would have turned 5, and so he was actually just going to kindergarten, or would have been going to kindergarten. And so we took off in 2018, and we were in Mexico for 4 months, and we were in Vancouver for 1 month. So we were gone for 5 months. Not that you need a kindergartner to go to school necessarily, but she started at that point to see what homeschooling would look like, because we had several friends in Kelowna that were homeschooling their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so she started kind of mock homeschooling, like doing some kindergarten level stuff when we were in Mexico with the kids. Because I mean, when you're living somewhere for 4 months, you're not on vacation. Like,
Yeah,
you burn through all the vacation stuff you can do in the first 2 to 3 weeks, and
absolutely.
also your budget's not going to support a vacation lifestyle if
Yep.
you're honest. So I mean, like, we were like, how are we going to fill like 4 months? And to be honest, we were never bored. It was great. I mean, it was a forced relax, and like I was, participating in the homeschooling, and but it was primarily her. And so that's what kind of got her the idea that she could do it. And I mean, like I said, she's a teacher, my mom's a teacher, my dad's a teacher.
Yep.
There's a lot of education theory, or pedagogy that she understands. And then and we both worked as teachers in Korea and with young children, so we knew what was required, and it was just a matter of like, what's the curriculum and the content that we're teaching the kids. So
Exactly.
that was our first taste of it. Now, truth be told, when we got back from that year, we did put Michael in school in kindergarten. And what I noticed very quickly, and this is just like a 2 day a week or 3 day a week kindergarten, it was half days. I found it so inconvenient, and forgive me if I'm speaking like out of in another world right now, because I work for myself, and the reason I want to work for myself is because I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it.
Yep.
I don't want to have to go and take my kids to school at 9 o'clock in the morning and go and pick them back up at noon, 3 days a week. That is extremely inconvenient to me. That's the first thing that I noticed. The second thing that I noticed is, even in that year that we put him in school, we took, I want to say, 2 months off. We were in California for a month in the winter of 2019, and we were in Mexico for a month in the winter. So right after that, we flew from LA to Puerto Vallarta, and I had to pay for school, and to a certain extent, and it was like pulling him out of school for 2 months was also not a great strategy, right? So when we got back, we're like, okay, well, what's this going to look like when we put the kids in school and we're pulling them all out of school for 2, 3 months a year? Because I didn't want to spend winters back in Canada at the time. And I just looked at the prognosis and I was like, this is a very inconvenient thing to have to do. Not only that, but we already knew that it would be much more efficient. Like, you can do a whole school day in 90 minutes if you do it properly,
Mm.
if the kid has, focused attention. And not only that, but you're working on the child's pace, not at the pace of the curriculum, right? So there's a lot of advantages in terms of time flexibility, in terms of academic achievement, in terms of pace of learning, in terms of flexibility, that are advantages to homeschooling. So we made the decision well before COVID hit to homeschool, and we've never looked back. I mean, like, my mom was a principal. She got her master's degree, which is a pretty good achievement for someone who was an orphan at essentially at age 70, even though both of her parents were alive.
Absolutely.
Grew up in an orphanage, and then, I'm not even going to go into the abuse issues, but there's a lot of abuse issues from her step parents, and to being, a master's level educated principal of a high school. Like, but she said, absolutely, if you can homeschool these kids and do a good job of it, you're going to be way better by these kids than you would if you put them in the school system. There's no doubt. And then you don't have to worry about the bullying and the peer pressure and the this and the that. Like, there's a lot of negative that can come from a school. I mean, there's some positive. My wife and I made it through the school system was okay.
Hmm.
I mean, I went to Catholic private schools my whole life, and all the schools in Ireland are Catholic. So,
Okay.
it's different than just putting your kid into a public school in Canada, right? Which I
Hmm.
would never do, in my opinion. It's not the route that I would choose for my kids, because I have the options that I have.
Absolutely.
I
Yep.
think there's a lot of challenges that are in the public school system, especially today. Like, today is so different than when we were kids.
Hmm. What are three things that you hope your children have as they make their way through their life?
Three things. Let's see. I would say I can think of two off the top of my head. Maybe, okay, I'll throw a third in there. So the first thing for me, as I've already indicated, is you can see that the thread of my life has a spiritual element to it.
Hmm.
I really hope that they have that grounding, that spiritual grounding, and know that there is an overarching goal to just having success on this terrestrial planet. That there is a life after this, and that they will be judged for the way that they live this life. And with that in mind, that their goal is to living that afterlife in a successful manner and getting to where they want to be in that manner. So I think that will be the number one driving force or I would like that to be the number one driving force in the way they live their lives. The second, I would say, is a very basic but very important indicator of future success on this life in both the material and non-material sense, which is, like we were indicating earlier, delayed gratification. That is the number one indicator of future academic and financial success, is the ability to delay gratification. And so I actually have proactively tested my children on this at the age of 3 and 4. When they hit that age, I test them to indicate whether or not they are going to be able to delay gratification. And there is a few ways you can do that, but the easiest way and the best known way is called the marshmallow test. When you leave them with some sort of candy, treat, marshmallow, or whatever for 15 minutes and tell them they're going to get 2 if they can wait that long without eating it. So I've tested my sons with that. My daughter is actually slated for testing. It's on my to-do list now.
Yeah.
To indicate whether or not they can do that. So I'm very well educating them in the delayed gratification. And this morning itself, we were doing accounting on their allowance, because they get a weekly allowance, and we were doing the accounting for the allowance because they were spending some money at church yesterday for how much they spent, and so that they can save up for the things that they want.
Yep.
So they wanted to buy some things from the church, and then we had to account for what they spent yesterday, so they can see that there's a reward to delaying this and not running out and buying the candy that they want, or when the ice cream truck comes by, which it's already starting to do here in Dallas at the moment, because they want that thing, right? And
Yep.
they know they need to delay. And then the third thing is I want them to be able to do whatever they want to do, not nothing, but to where they want to do. So one of the things that I'm planning on doing with them, and I've already started doing with them, is showing them how to make money so that they don't have to trade their time one for one for it. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that we're going to do is there's something called bulk garbage days down here. And because we live in a fairly affluent part of North Dallas, there's like, people will throw away brand new bikes. They'll throw away because they just don't like, like this morning or yesterday, my wife is told me I got to go pick up these weights, because this kettlebells and these weights that this woman down the road is just throwing away if no one comes and collects them. And she wanted them because she gave away her weights when she left Canada.
Yep.
And I've picked up, like, I have a $1,700 standing desk, an L-shaped standing desk. Like, these things are expensive in my office right now, because someone was just want to get rid of it, right? And what I'm gonna do is, when I have my utility trailer, like I was telling you earlier before we started recording,
Yep.
I have to fly up to Washington to bring my utility trailer down here. So I have a little utility trailer that my motorcycle is sitting on right now. When I have that trailer down here, I'm going to be going around picking up dressers and rugs and bikes and whatever that people of value are throwing away. And the reason I'm going to do that is not because I can't afford it, or not because I just want to save the money. I do, but the primary reason I'm going to do that and have my kids running shotgun is because I want them to go through the exercise of accounting for everything that we have, store it in our garage here, put it on Facebook Marketplace, and physically write down the accounting for what they picked up on the street for free and how many hundreds of dollars they're going to make for someone to come pick it up from them later. And that mentality in my children, to know that they can make as much as an adult would make in a day, or how much they would take a month to make or 4 months to make in their allowance, they can make by picking something up for free on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Now, what they're going to learn for that is they do not need to trade their time for money. And when they learn that, they will be unstoppable.
I like that. That last one is like exceptional.
Yeah. That mentality, I first got that mentality when I was kind of like in 9th grade science class, when I came up with that $1 million 6% idea. But getting there, seeing how you can get there, that took me until 18, 19 before I was able to start in the stock market and able to start doing this and that and try to do. I'm going to teach these kids how to do that at 8 and 6 and 4. They will be able to understand how to make money without having to put money or time into it, or a lot of time into it, and identify a gap, a service gap. Because I'm going to explain to them explicitly, all you're doing is exploiting the gap between when someone needs to get rid of something and when someone wants to pick up something. That's all.
Interesting.
There's value in that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Very interesting. You've had a very interesting last 6 to 9 months. You moved from BC to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Can you sort of go through and discuss that decision and the process in which you went about it with your wife?
Yeah, oof, there's a lot there to unpack. I'll try to attack it and see how we do. So obviously, this is in the context of COVID. As I mentioned, I'm, born and raised in Canada. I was part of the military, although that wasn't my career, even though it was slated to be originally. I was a very proud Canadian, very patriotic, very, very proud. And that was very clear to people who I met when I was living overseas in Korea. I have a lot of American friends,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of obviously discussions between differences in the two countries and the other countries as well. But it was predominantly Canada, U.S. because those are the closest two proxies for each other, right? And very, very, I value. I would say, if nothing else, my experience in the military made me value the sacrifice that people went through, because I would know people who not only fought in previous wars, but my unit was the second unit to be sent to Afghanistan when that war jumped off. I joined the military and I had friends that went over immediately to Afghanistan and were killed at that time defending freedoms over there. Okay.
Wow.
Now, whether or not you believe in the war in Afghanistan, which I actually don't, that's a whole nother story about those two towers and the excuse to invade Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that, we'll say the Taliban running Afghanistan was probably not going to be great for personal freedoms. Okay. And the Canadians that went over there and sacrificed their lives so that other people could have those freedoms, that means something to me. It means something to me that people did that in the in 1930s and 40s to fight over in Europe so that we could preserve that here. And during the time that COVID started, first of all, I mean, I'm already on the alternative health radar. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
already on my radar.
Yep.
And I indicated previously in 2013 was when that really came to, we'll say, when the rubber hit the road on that, for two reasons. One, I was having a very difficult time with my health when I left for Korea in 2011. I was starting to have some health issues, and by the time I got back in 2013, sorry, when I left in 2008, it was bad. And when I came back in 11, it was really starting to get bad. And by 2013, I was facing some severe health challenges. I won't go into detail, but I will
Yep.
tell you that the day that I was served with the lawsuit in 2012, I was slated for surgery as a result of the health challenges that had been accumulating for years.
Mm-hmm.
And the course of action, the course of care that I was being treated with in the traditional medical system was only making things worse. So in 2013, two things happened. One, I discovered that there was an alternative way to attack this problem and started doing it. And I was told after the medical doctors had thrown up their hands and said, "There's nothing more we can do." I have the same condition that Michael Jackson has.
Okay.
Okay, I have hypopigmentation vitiligo. It's a blanking of the blanching of the pigmentation in your skin. Okay, and among other autoimmune conditions. And they had told me that there's nothing you can do to stop this at this point. You are going to suffer from this the rest of your life. Okay. And I'll just say that it first appeared in some extremely sensitive areas on your body.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. And on that day, October 6, 2012, I was slated to have surgery to remove parts of that extremely sensitive area. Okay. And fast forward to 2013, after the surgery didn't work and failed and made things worse. And they were literally like, "You're just going to have to keep cutting things away." Okay. I was like, there's got to be a better solution to this. So I started researching and using my own brain
Yep.
to figure out how to solve this. And within 90 days, not only had I stopped it, but I had almost completely reversed what all the doctors and medical specialists and skin specialists said was not possible to even stop. And I was like, you were all lying to me. You were just telling me what you could do for me, which is, by the way, the same thing in the financial sector,
Yep.
right? They'll tell you you're all good, but they're really only telling the best that they can do for you. You go somewhere else, you could probably find an alternative that's going to be better, right?
Correct. Yep.
So not only that, but my son was going to be born. And my wife, I told her, I was like, can you please look into whether or not we're going to vaccinate Michael, because I don't have the time to do it. I'm building this business, da da da.
Yep.
And she came back to me and said, okay, I found so much information on both sides of this issue. I don't know what to do with it. You're the analyst. Look at the data, figure out where it is, right? So I started looking into it from a data and analytics point of view. And what I found, like, they don't even hide this. What I found was absolutely appalling. I
Mm.
didn't grow up as an anti-vaxxer. I didn't grow up as someone critical of the medical system. I did trust them. And by the way, my travel vaccination is what kicked off my autoimmune when I was going to Korea,
Oh wow.
right? I didn't realize that until afterwards. I didn't realize how heavy my heavy metal toxicity was until afterwards. And all of that was from the aluminum and stuff that I was injected with. The
Mm-hmm.
point is that I started following the data and the science, and that, like I said, it's not even hidden if you look for it, if you know what to look for. So fast forward 7 years, and like, I've already achieved the top level education in my field. I started looking into this as a point of interest because my brain just needs to study something. And so
Yep.
that's what I was studying. So anyway, so even in our previous conversations, Mark, you know that, like, I've been able to reference different things. I've sent you
Mm-hmm.
articles,
Yep.
things that I'm reading on this topic. So I was very well in tune of what was going on, and so I knew that this vaccination thing had some serious problems. Even where it seemingly shows some benefit, causes long-term problems, which,
Mm-hmm.
by the way, is the human condition. You think you're doing something good, and you spend 20 years doing it, and then you realize, oh, oil is going to, dry up, or oil is going to cause pollution, or even the electricity we have running through our houses is causing us cancer. Or Wi-Fi is great until it gives you cancer.
Yep.
Cell phones are great until they give you cancer. Stuff like that, right? You just find that there's a better way to do things, or you have to mitigate the effects of this new technology developed. So vaccines are no different. It's just like anything else humans develop, right? But one of the things that humans are very bad at doing is improving the body proactively with pharmaceuticals, right? So if you think about it, our bodies were designed and survived just fine through a lot of challenges up until this point. And to think that we can improve them by putting something man-made into them to make it run better is, I would say, folly on its face. But let's just say
Yep.
COVID came around, and you have the combination of what they're being told, and we'll say the misinformation that was coming out of China in the beginning, because that was scary,
Yep.
right? You see people, like, they were being told their lungs are just exploding and they're collapsing on the street, right, in the subway. I'm not sure if you remember those videos, because that never happened anywhere, ever. Didn't happen here. Hospitals weren't overloaded. So I could see that this was completely a farce. And when you looked at the data and the studies, you could see that the number of mortality from this, not infection, because that's what they're measuring, infection, not mortality, you were seeing that this was a complete hoax.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, fair enough. Then they rolled the vaccine. And I could tell, knowing from following a vaccine history for a long time, that this was going to be created into some sort of ID card for vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
And that you would need that ID card to do whatever you wanted to do. Because we were already in lockdown. And I knew that, so we were already a year into lockdown. So this came to a head. And I'll tell you what the trigger was for me to say that I needed to move. Was I was sitting just after Canada Day this past year, so 2021. I just, I bought a house in 2019, spent over $100,000 renovating it, and I was sitting on my brand newly finished deck, which I was very proud of, which is the last thing I needed to renovate, overlooking my pool in my backyard, which is exactly the way I wanted it, and it had been that way for like a week. And they had just put out information that there was a bill going through the legislature of Canada that would restrict Canadian access to free information in the internet and start filtering it.
Yep.
And that they would be able to start fining you for what they would deem hate speech or anything that they didn't like that you said online. And I said, I think I'm going to have to move. I think I'm actually going to have to move.
So that was like the bolt of lightning moment.
It was like, so what I didn't go through, and I guess is relevant to the story, is that my business was doing very well. I was making a good amount of money, not even like passively, okay. so that I didn't have to work. Like my business had finally reached the point where, I was starting to automate it. I had an assistant that was becoming an associate and fully licensed. He could do everything for me. I loved where I lived. I loved what I did. I loved my house that I'd worked so hard to develop, and I did not want to move. And when that lightning bolt moment, as you said, came forward, I had just okay. So a couple of points in the previous 12 months, I had found out that there was going to be a 100-foot cell phone tower put across the creek from me
Mm-hmm.
because I backed on. We fronted onto the creek actually. The houses in front of us backed onto the creek. So we lived right along the greenway there in Kelowna. It was perfect, on the border of southeast Kelowna. And they were going to put a 100-foot cell phone tower, like, I don't know, 600 meters from the deck that I was sitting on. That would have been my view. So I found the person who owned the land that got that contract, showed him so I had my lawyer pull land titles information, find where that person lived, went to their door, showed him the information that I had looked at as to why he didn't want that cell phone tower on his land, let alone near to everyone else's land, and went with him to City Hall to remove that building permit.
Wow.
Okay. That was the previous summer. Then 3 months later, I got sick with COVID, as you know. My father got sick with COVID. He had flown up from Vancouver to visit us. I ended up in the hospital, ended up in the ICU, ended up very close to dying. And as you know, my father did die through this exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sitting there 6 months later on the deck and thinking, I just built up all of this and I'm now going to have to leave it. But if you really believe what you believe, well, I forgot the point in the story where when I was in the hospital, I found out that the building permit that we pulled had just been reinstated because the guy was threatened by Rogers Communications, even though they didn't pay him a dime for the contract. He had signed it, which doesn't validate the contract until consideration is passed. And I explained that to him, but in the hospital, I found out that that tower was going to eventually go back up. So I was going to have to move anyway at some point when that tower went up. In my job, I had started to get a little bit disenchanted because I'd reached the point where I was working on a lot of, we'll say, executive level stuff, but wasn't being paid on an executive level. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, technically I was, but it was only because my business was generating that. I wasn't an owner in equity in the overall company.
Yep.
And a lot of the time that I was spending was tied up into activities that really were concerned with the company's business, not my personal business. It would have directly benefited my business, which is why I was doing it. But the point is that I was spending a lot of time doing other things than advising. Okay. And then furthermore, and this is just a personal sense where you've seen where I've come from, I learned that our company had hired for our Women in Wealth Gala, we'll say someone on the rainbow spectrum to give the, the keynote speech. So it wasn't a trans person, but just a person who would dress as a woman to give the keynote speech. And when I brought this up to our CEO and why that might be offensive to some people in our client base and to 8 out of the 10 advisors who have a Christian based
Mm-hmm.
practice, I was told that we can't be silent on the issue, that we need to support equality, and that Black Lives Matter, and that as a white middle-aged man, he had the responsibility to make up for the deficiencies that other people experience in their journeys. And I said to him, I was like, well, coming from someone who is not white, who started their business in a predominantly white community, that he knew nobody and built it up from scratch and is now one of the top producers in the firm. I will tell you that the moment that you start giving handouts to people based on the color of their skin or who they are, that they will never stop asking for handouts.
Mm.
I'll tell you, the people that you want to have working with you are the people who only want equitable treatment, not any advantage whatsoever. People have different life circumstances. You're not going to change that. The moment you try to equalize the outcomes is the moment you will never stop trying to hand people money. And so I went from a position where I was like, hey, I love living here. I love living in this house. I love living in this community, living what I do. to thinking, I'm not going to be able to stay in this house if they put that tower up. I'm not going to be able to stay at this company if this is the mentality of the people who are leading it. And obviously, British Columbia, as we've now clearly seen, has been a laggard on the idea of personal freedoms.
Yep.
And then Canada itself, with Trudeau at the helm, I'm not even going to start to go into that, especially since we've seen the trucker rally and everything else that's gone from there. So I said, and I mean, so I didn't foresee an event like that happening. I just said, Canada itself is further on the left on the political spectrum than I would like to live. British Columbia is even further than that with the NDP in.
Yep.
And if I'm going to have to move from this house, I'm going to move from Kelowna. And if I'm going to move from Kelowna, I may as well move to the place that I think best fits my personality politically and spiritually. So it's either going to be Texas or Florida. And Florida, I still see as a purple state.
Yep.
Even though DeSantis is doing a great job down there, it's too humid, and it's still purple.
Yep.
So as far as I'm concerned, so it was going to be Texas, and I looked around Texas and I said, okay, Houston is too humid, San Antonio is too hot, Austin is too liberal, so it's going to be Dallas. So I started researching where in Dallas. There's a website called niche.com that allows you to identify different metrics about a community. Obviously, being an analyst and doing a lot of real estate investing in the States, I identified communities that would work for me and found one, and that's how we ended up here.
And your wife was totally on board with this? You both of you bantered this back and forth?
She was not. She was not at first. I'll tell you this.
So Mark, after everything that you had proven to your wife and you'd never let her down and you'd always followed through with every promise and commitment you had made, she wasn't on board for relocating?
At first. So here's the process because you've asked me several times, how did this work with your wife? And I'm like, this is how I did it. And not mention her. So here's how it worked out. So like I remember this like it was only 9 months ago. So I was sitting on the deck, and what I did, I was thinking about this, and so I eventually wrote a pros and cons list of moving to the States and what it would allow me to do. Okay, and what the benefits were, obviously, and what the drawbacks were. And so I wrote it down. And one of the things that my wife had constantly been complaining about, especially in the last couple of years, is that despite the fact that we had a great community in Kelowna, it could have been a lot better. Like the friends that we had, the quality of people that were in our close knit network, like we just wanted a closer knit network. And if I'm being very blunt, and I don't want anyone that I know taking offense to this, but through COVID is a very divisive issue, right? And you're looking at it and saying, a lot of your friends that you realize that you didn't realize that you and your friends saw this fundamental issue so differently. Like I don't believe that you could take someone's child, inject anything, doesn't matter what it is, without their parents knowing, and that be okay.
Yep.
I don't think that you should be able to force anyone to inject anything into their body that they don't want to have injected into their body, right? And that is in Canadian charter rights, and that is in the Nuremberg Code that we established after World War II. And Canadians simply have forgotten that. And a lot of them that are go along, get along type of people, they don't want to fight for what their right is. They don't see this as an obligation. And I would say, like in my church community alone, half of the people in the community, even in that tight-knit men's group, 3 out of the 7 of us felt that way or along those lines, right? Not to mention the fact that each one of the vaccines, quote unquote, gene therapy vaccine, whatever you want to call it, have been integrally or intimately involved with abortion at some level, either through development or testing. I sat on the board for the Right to Life Society in Kelowna, right? I'm not about to go and take an injection that I know was developed through abortion.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that. Yeah.
A lot of people don't, right? And even in my church community group, they're like, oh, well, this and that and the other. And it's okay because of this. And I'm like, no, this is a hard stop for me. Like, even if I was okay with the science or the theory, the fact that someone else had to die so that I could take this, no, not okay, not doing it, right? So anyway, so the point is that I made this list, and she had her own list, and she was still wary about it. But I have very few, I would say, natural gifts and talents. One of them is kind of, I'm not a specialist at anything. I'm not the smartest student in the room. I'm not anything. I take I have this like subconscious ability to take in information from a lot of different sources and kind of generally see what direction I think it might go, and I'm generally right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I just felt like Canada was going in the wrong direction. And I saw that before my wife. And part of the reason I think I saw it before her is because 7 years worth of studying this stuff, into the vaccine stuff, I stopped studying it on a day-to-day basis and started kind of looking at general themes of it. Whereas, especially with COVID, she was into the weeds every single day,
Yeah.
and she was never looking at the big, where is this going, right? What's the strategy here, right? And I was looking at that, and so I saw that coming before she did, and she trusted me enough to be like, okay, I understand what you're saying, and so on and so forth. But I'm still like, she's much more emotional than I am.
Yep.
So she's like, this is, these are my hesitations. And then, when Biden came out with the whole mid-January, you're going to need a vaccination to cross that border, even with an essential worker visa,
Mm-hmm.
I had to accelerate my plans from moving a year from then to moving a week from then. Right. But she had already bought in at that point. She said, yes, I understand, this is likely to happen. This is going to be bad. We want the freedom, and we can always come back. We are all Canadian citizens, right? And she knew we were going to have to move from the house anyway, and we agreed that if we were going to move from that house, we might as well move out of Kelowna. So why
Yep.
not move to Texas? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
difference does it make if all of our friends in Kelowna are gone anyway because we're somewhere else, right? So she was up for, and she actually has family in Austin, which is closer because our other closest family is in Ireland or the Cayman Islands,
Gotcha.
right? So she was, I would say, emotionally had less buy-in because she couldn't see what I was seeing in terms of what was coming down the pike. But she did understand from my list and her own list that, from a community standpoint, from a work standpoint, she knew I was becoming challenged in what I was doing, and who I was doing it with, and the direction the company was going. And she saw that all these things made sense, and that we could do it, so we owed it to our family to do it, so that if we ended up coming back, fine. But if we did it now, if we did it then, which is October last year, that we would be able to secure it in a way that wouldn't force us to have to get a vaccination to cross that border.
Yep.
So as you know the story, I like I so I because of my background and abilities, I had the ability to go to the border and get a 3-year work visa on the spot. So that took 2 hours. On September 27th, I did that. The following week, I drove across the border. I flew down here to Dallas. I checked out the community. I drove all around here, decided this was going to be sufficient. Almost bought a house while I was here. Didn't. Flew back home. And then we're like, okay, let's plan to leave next year. And then the announcement came out. And then on October 14th, we were originally deciding to come after the baby was born because we were pregnant. She was seven and a half months pregnant at the time. And we're like, there's no way we're leaving before that baby's born. And then on October 14th, I bolted up in bed, and I was like, it was 11 o'clock. I remember this. I was like, wait a second. If this baby is born late, like our last one was born 10 days late, this baby is born late, and we do not have a birth certificate before Christmas, we are not making it into this country after January 15th if we don't have a birth certificate for this child. And it can take a month to get that certificate.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be in the middle of winter if we're coming down here. So we need to leave now. We took 5 minutes to discuss it, and it was on. So on October 18th, which was the only sunny day in October at that point, I took about 50% of the possessions we owned, fired it out into the front lawn, put a sign on Facebook saying, there are free things at this address, come and get it. And on November 15th, we rolled out of Dodge with everything that we owned and across the border.
That is just one of the most intense things that I know of anyone personally.
Yeah, it was a whirl. It was an organized withdrawal, but it was tough because, I mean, just I'll give you an example by way of the vehicles. This importing 5 vehicles into the United States was an extreme challenge. Not only did I have to pay them off for 100,000, two of the vehicles still had loans on them,
Mm-hmm.
which was a surprise because you can't hold a lease while you're residing in another country. If you're just visiting, it's one thing, but if you're moving, it's a different thing. The organization, it's not like you're just moving down the road,
Yeah.
right? The organization visas for them, importing vehicles, manifest for shipping things, logistics. We drove with my wife 8 months pregnant and 50 feet worth of vehicle and 10,000 pounds worth of stuff attached to us in the winter through mountain passes from Kelowna to Dallas, Texas, with 4 kids in the car and an 8 month pregnant wife, right? And it went off almost without a hitch because I planned it. It was my sole focus for 3 weeks to
It,
make sure that happened.
it's sounds like almost every struggle and every challenge that you had faced through your whole life, Mark, sort of allowed you to execute that flawlessly.
Yeah, it was I would say definitely if my life wasn't half administration, the paperwork alone would have crushed me to get those vehicles. And I'm talking
Mm.
about out of country inspections, emissions conformity, lease lien lease releases, H5 import documents at the border, dependent visas at the border, making sure everything was lined up. So I knew, I'm not even shitting you, I knew more about importing in a vehicle into the United States than the border guard knew when I got there,
Yeah, I bet.
right? Because my entire future depended on getting over that border safely.
Yep.
And to boot, my wife started bleeding and having some early labor indications at the border. So we were researching hospitals. Where can we go near Spokane
Yep.
to deliver this baby? I was terrified that we would have this. I was always Utah in my dream. We would have this baby somewhere on a highway in Utah because she was due on December 1st. And it was November 5th when we crossed the border, November 12th when we arrived. The baby could easily come 3 weeks early.
Yep. 100%.
And the stress of it all, right?
Exactly.
Healthcare. Okay. Obviously, everyone knows the US healthcare system is completely different. How are you going to financially manage it if you have to airlift this woman from Moab, Utah to Salt Lake to have this baby?
Yep.
What are you going to do with the kids if that happens?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is the level of planning that I had to iterate multiple different versions of this. What route were we going to take? Which mountain pass could we go through? What was the weather looking like? I changed it from January 15th departure to December 28th to November 13th to November 8th to November 5th. And my sisters were pissed because they had to change. I had a sister flying in from the UK. They had to change their plans and come up. And you know what? People don't remember this part of the story is that on November 13th, which was one of our original leave dates, that's when the jumped off with the flooding in BC.
Oh, in Abbotsford.
So we wouldn't know it's not just Abbotsford. All of the highways to the Okanagan
You're
got
right,
cut
it
off.
did. Yeah, it all got washed away, didn't it?
So there's a good chance I would not have gotten out of the country if I
Mm.
didn't leave when I did.
It's crazy how sometimes life unfolds for you.
Yeah, oh for sure. And you know what that did cause? It caused all the stuff that I packed in the box to be shipped to not arrive until January.
Oh, of course, because they wouldn't have been able to.
Exactly. So not only that, but when we got here, so we had the baby successfully, and the house that we were renting originally was small, and with the baby, like it just wasn't going to work. So we moved again. When I got here, we moved in on November 12th. Then we moved out on January 3rd into a new house that was bigger, that was literally around the corner. And then we had to furnish and buy all the furniture and move to the house that we bought here in Melissa on March 1st. So I've moved 3 times here. I've lived in
Once
3 different houses already.
and then internationally as well.
And then the move to get down here too. Yeah. And by the way, the second 2 moves were happening when we had the baby.
Oh man.
So I had to do it all myself. Like my wife basically was, I mean, she did, I shouldn't say that. My wife was amazing. Like she basically packed everything in because I was still running my business at the time. Remember, we had some
Yeah.
business dealings back in November,
Yep.
which caused a little bit of an issue because during this time, all that was going on. And so I was trying to run my business at the same time as having this baby, at the same time as moving multiple times. And so it was pretty intense. It was pretty intense. But I will say that last year was my highest grossing volume of all the years I worked.
Oh, wow.
So by 40%.
Again, oh, wow.
Hmm.
That's insane.
So it was intense. It was intense. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do that unless I had spent the last 2 years training my associate,
Yep.
because he was amazing. Like, I couldn't say enough about Spencer and his capabilities. Um, but yeah, it's growing the team, selecting the right team members, and leveraging their skills that you've trained them with to be able to take over in critical moments. And that was the most amazing part of it, is the ability to have pulled that off without having to go through, like, obviously there was little, parts that could have gone smoother, but yeah, like, when I look back on that period, that 3 month, 4 month period through that transition, it'll say September through January, or let's say October through March when we moved in here and set up. It was intense, and I was definitely like, I have to be like on my game to make
Yep.
sure everything goes off without a hitch, because I can't afford for it not to.
Absolutely. So, what do you feel is the importance of male role models in raising a family, Mark?
Yeah, I don't think there is anything more important than that. So I think it's pretty integral. I think, and this, I'm not sure. I'm not concerned about being PC here. What I will say is that, men and women are incredibly different, and their roles in the family are incredibly different. And this is, I'm
Mm,
just speaking my opinion here, but what I'll say is is earlier I made comment on how important it is for the child to have a parent at home at the critical points of development. And ideally, that's the mother, because the mother has a nurturing role that the father just does not fill as an evolutionary standpoint. Okay,
100%.
earliest formative years. Those early formative years, men can't breastfeed. Okay,
Yep.
that is a bond between mother and child. Right now, I don't even sleep with my wife because she's breastfeeding our child,
Hmm.
and I sleep in a different room. Okay, and I agree to that because I know how important that is, and I also like sleep. So that's that's important, right? So women have that naturally nurturing role. And I'll tell you, with the father, okay, I'll tell you in the context of something that I recently heard on a podcast that I listened to about faith and development in children. If a mother is less, let's say the mother doesn't go to church, or isn't the leader, is the leader, or doesn't we'll say follow. This is a Catholic podcast. The
Hmm.
the faith. If she does not participate, 25% of people who fell away from the faith indicated that was a primary reason for them not indicating that, or not continuing in the faith themselves. If the father didn't participate, it was an indicator for 57%.
Wow.
57.
That's huge. Like a huge
That
difference.
that is huge. And the best way that I make sense of that is that fathers in their family units are the natural head from an evolutionary standpoint, from a social standpoint, are the head of the family. They are the leaders of the family. If the leader doesn't believe in something, the people who he is leading aren't going to either. And that is very indicative of what I just said in terms of, we'll say, continuing the faith in the context of the mother not doing it versus the father not doing it,
Hmm.
right? Because, like it or not, children understand this natural law, this dynamic, that the fathers are the leaders and the heads of these households, and whatever that father does is going to have a much larger impact. That is why in the faith context, it's so much more important for the father to be the head of the family. A lot of people will defer that religion piece or that faith piece to women because they think it's, praying is a woman thing, or meditation or whatever, it's a woman thing. It is not. It is extremely important for fathers to be well grounded in everything they do, not just faith, everything they do, because their impact on their children, especially as those children get older, is incredibly important.
Hmm.
So I think it's extremely important, I would say, and it becomes more important over time as those children age.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, but that's once again that's just in my personal experience as well, and that takes nothing away from Mama G. I see her definitely as a leader within our house. And
Hmm.
after, obviously, because we are in a blended family,
Hmm.
and so, I haven't raised, or I haven't been there when the kids were ultra young. I think they lean off of both of us in regards to certain leadership qualities and certain qualities that we have. Like, I can't impact the relationship that the kids have with Mama G, and nor can she impact the relationship that they have with me. And I just hope that in both interactions that our kids, they're taking the good bits from both of us, and hopefully, on their own accord, they'll understand what, well, maybe Thommo couldn't. Maybe, he could have done better at that, and maybe Mum could have done better at that. But I'm hoping, at least between the two, as the kids get older and develop, that we both have a set of life skills and different experiences that they can learn and progress from.
Sure. I think at the end of the day, parenting itself is sacrificial by nature.
Mm.
It is a sacrifice by nature. That's what parenting is. That is a sacrificial love. Now, I think because the children, again, that natural law, that truth, that natural truth of parenting being a sacrifice, they know that and they appreciate that if they're honest with themselves, even if their parents are far from perfect. My parents were far from perfect. Okay. I can point out a new innumerable shortcomings of my father and my mother, and I know you can too. We've had
Mm-hmm.
some discussions on
Yeah.
that. Okay. But in a lot of cases, I would say the vast majority of cases, a mature child, and I say I'm including myself in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm still a child of my parents. A mature child will look back on their childhood, will recognize the sacrifice and effort that it went into raising them, and be very grateful. And nothing will show that to you more than becoming a parent yourself. Okay. And that's why I joke with some of my friends around and people who are around my age and have yet to have children, because in my personal experience, in my personal belief, strong belief, is that until you pay forward what you've been given, you don't reach full maturity because you don't understand what it takes to have the life of somebody else in your hand
I would
and
agree.
be responsible for the development and the successful development of that child.
I
That is a completely different level of responsibility.
100% agree. I mean, when I look back on, once again, like, we've had these conversations, but when I look on how my parents raised me, I just hope that they did the best with what they had or what they knew at the time. And I've taken my own personal responsibility that when I know better, I do better. And even now, to a point when, if I learn something in having personal therapy, or if I learn about a personal dynamic between myself and Mama G, I'm trying to impart that knowledge, because I don't want my children to walk my path. I want them to walk a path next to mine. And when mine stops, then be able to continue on that path way further than what I ever could. And I hope that they pass that down to their children, and then their children to their children. And that's how I'm hoping that they will progress.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is that I think you will accomplish that. And I think, like I said, parent or children, especially as they get older, they give their parents a lot of leeway, right? For things that they thought might not have gone as well when they were kids. They have a lot of they'll make, for lack of a better term, they'll see their parents in the best positive light because they know that there is a lot of sacrifice because they're going through it now. So, and I mean, on that note, in terms of wanting your children to have a better life than you did and make better decisions, I'm going through that right now, and I can tell you two things. One, for all of the, we'll say, for lack of a better term, in the Canadian context, poverty that we grew up in, right?
Mm-hmm.
I we did not have enough food to eat almost ever. We had to have food given to us, donated to us. We always had to buy, the oldest bread that was about to go bad and freeze it in multiple freezers and buy this and that and just like make ends meet however we could. I never went hungry. I always had a roof over my head.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to participate in sports. I was able to excel at school. And I don't feel like I lacked in anything. I mean, I can tell you now that I have been blessed to the point where I have to start peeling back benefits to my kids,
Yeah.
because I'll tell you this, no one else, well, not many other fathers can take their kids skiing to a private ski instructor 3 days a week, who can have a private swimming instructor come and teach your kids to swim at your own pool, because your dad doesn't want to go to the public pool and freeze in the public pool with group lessons for everybody else. They don't have their dad coaching their football teams. They don't have their private tutors to teach them piano or whatever. Like, and these are all things. They don't have their dad taking them to warm countries 4 months a year,
Yep.
right? They like, that is a life that, if like, I can honestly say I'm jealous of my children's childhood. Like, if I had the childhood that they had, I would be just like over the moon. Like, they are some of the happiest kids around. But I can also see that I need to start introducing some more adversity into their lives, because they're getting to the age where they like, if I'm being honest, they've been so blessed in that way. They need to understand that there's a responsibility to pay it forward,
Mm-hmm.
and that things don't always come easy, and start introducing some adversity into their lives. But I say all that to say is that, part of the reason that motivates me is one of your earliest questions, and like how everything in your upbringing, how you developed as a result, is that my parents left a third world country that they could have very comfortably lived in, that their whole families were in,
Mm-hmm.
that they had grounded communities in, and they left for a better life. I'm not saying there was any political oppression or anything like that,
Yep.
but they knew that the limits that they could reach in Trinidad and Tobago were not as high as the limits that they could allow us to reach here. And I'll break this down for you really, really close. Like, my mom's best friend, one of her best friends, is a medical doctor, runs a network of private medical clinics and pharmacies.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's best friend is one of the wealthiest people in the country,
Wow.
and runs a network of grocery stores and a transportation logistics company.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's best friend's father was the education minister for the country of Trinidad and Tobago. Her husband is the top cardiothoracic surgeon in the Caribbean, educated at Harvard. All of their children either went to Harvard or Yale.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's my mom's best friend and her family. Had she stayed in Trinidad, she would have been able to leverage networks,
Yep.
right, and achieved, quite honestly, at least some moniker of a different type of life that we were grown up in. I would have known my both my parents had 6 siblings. I would have known all of my cousins. Well, maybe not all. I've got over 100 cousins on my mom's side, because her mother was one of 18 kids.
Yep.
But that's a different story. But they left, and they lived a lower standard of living, arguably a more difficult existence, so that we could have better. And I will be damned if I was not going to take advantage of the opportunity that were lay before me, winning the global lottery of being born in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to take that and run for it with it as much as I possibly could. And so I'm doing the same thing for my kids. I mean, ironically, I'm now in a different country. My wife is has traveled to 2 different countries
Yep.
to be where we are. And this was very intentional. And I will tell you that the opportunity set, let's say, at least from a work standpoint and from an economic standpoint, that I have the ability to take advantage of down here, is higher than what I did have available to me in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So unlike my parents, where they were moving very young age, very uneducated, and starting from scratch, I'm able to move not just laterally, but up
Yep.
here, and very quickly. When they call America the land of opportunity, they are not joking. I'll tell you that my tax rate down here will be a fraction of what it was up there. And the upside potential in any work I do down here is much higher than it was in Canada. doing what I was doing there. So what does that translate to? A better life for my kids. But I can guarantee you they will know why they are able to accept, have access to all these opportunities because of the sacrifice, not just my sacrifices, but the sacrifices of their grandmother,
Yep.
who is hopefully going to be visiting here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I can damn well guarantee as well from the conversations that we've had that you are a very grounded person. Not that I've met your wife, but I'm going to assume that she is as well, and I know that that will flow through to your children, that they will be extremely grounded, but know that they have opportunities from the sacrifices that both you, your wife, and relative grandparents have made.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like that. I mean, there is a pattern to this. Like it's just hard if you don't come from the struggle or you didn't directly observe that struggle. It's
Mm.
hard for those kids to really identify for the need to drive themselves and push themselves to be the best they can be. But I will do my best to explain to them and to exemplify for them the traits that they need to have to go forward and push forward. I learned, I'm not sure if you ever read the book Millionaire Next Door, but I learned a very interesting fact about millionaires in the United States, that 80% of them are first generation millionaires because they're self-made.
No, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either. It was shocking. I thought a lot more people inherited their millions than made them themselves, but no, 8 out of 10 made their own.
That's crazy. That's really interesting as well at the same time. Mark, what financial advice would you give your 18-year-old self to set up your 20s? And I'm talking the decade of your 20s.
Yeah, I would say I'll concentrate it into one piece of advice, because when I was 18, I already had a much higher level of financial education than the average person.
You did,
One
yep.
thing that I would say, because what I learned was in reading Kiyosaki and playing like cash flow and starting to study finance, I learned a lot about how to try to make money and how money works. But one thing that is kind of like that I've still even never read in any book that I would give myself as a piece of advice is hold period, right? Delayed gratification is low hanging fruit. I indicated why that's so important
Mm-hmm.
earlier.
Yep.
I knew that already. That's naturally embedded in me. And if someone doesn't know that, then I would give them that advice. But for myself, I knew that already. The second thing would be hold period. So what I mean by hold period is just because an idea is a good idea doesn't mean it's a good idea at this moment. I'll give you an example,
Hmm.
2 examples, okay? 3 examples actually that I have made mistakes in my 20s, okay? I held 600 shares of Apple in 2006.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I was trading Apple from 2002 when they were bringing out the iPod mini and all this other stuff, 2004 or something like that. And in 2006, when there was a stock split, sorry, it wasn't 600 shares, it was 800 shares. I had 400 shares that I had gotten called out on a put option. And then the share split, and I had 800 shares of Apple in my personal name. And I used my student loans, which I lost, by the way, because I didn't hold those shares. And Apple corrected down 16%. But because I was so leveraged, I had to sell out of my position. My point is that I knew Apple was a good company. I knew it in my gut. I could see where it was going. It was going to be huge. And I had 800 shares of Apple in 2006. And today that would be worth, I don't even know. I haven't done the calculation recently, but I
Uh,
can tell you it's probably come up
Lots.
10x since then.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
lots. Yeah.
Be worth over $1 million easily.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The second one, an example where I didn't hold and I should have, is also Apple. I held another 200 or 300 shares in 2009 after the crash. When I'll give you an indication as to how I knew that that was a good idea to own those shares, was that the amount of money that Apple had in the bank in cash sitting in their bank account was worth more than Apple stock was trading in 2009 after the crash.
Oh,
So
wow.
what it was saying is that Apple was worth less than the cash they had in the bank. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't valuing any of its future income. And again, the reason I didn't hold then was because I was living in Korea and I had just gone through the 2008 crash and a devaluation of the Korean won versus the Canadian dollar. And basically, there are 2 or 3 instances in my life where I'd made a bunch of money and then lost it all and then had to rebuild my life. I had to pay for food. So I had to liquidate my position to actually afford my life. So I was very irritated that I didn't hold on in 2009. So I didn't hold on in 2006. I didn't hold on in 2009. In 2007, 8, gold had gone from like $400, $600 to $800. And I knew it was still going to go higher. And I should have held some gold at that point. I'm not saying holding gold is an intelligent decision now, but gold went from $600, $700 to whatever it is now, $1,900, right? And that it hit 1,800 in like 2015. So it would have been a good hold. Now here's the worst one of it all, is that I bought $30,000 worth of Bitcoin in 2015. Let that sink in for you. On average, Bitcoins were $236 when I started selling.
Oh, I'm letting it sink in, hence why I was quiet. Yeah.
Now, and so I'll tell you how hard I hit Bitcoin. I raised capital. I raised $50,000 from friends and family to start 2 different corporations to buy, hold, and trade Bitcoin, 2014 through 15. And all Bitcoin did through that period of time, if you look at the chart, is go from $735 per coin down to $230 per coin. And I was stupid enough to sell it because I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. But that was tens of thousands of Bitcoins.
Wow.
Now, I could feel sorry for myself and say, oh, you had it right. You just didn't have the right timing. But here's a couple of things. Number one, I was able to clearly identify that the US was going through a major housing crisis in 2008 and was able to buy over 50 houses. All of those houses tripled in value. They're not all mine, but I bought 5 of them for myself, and I bought some with clients. That's what that service was, right? So that was pivotal in launching my career in the real estate investment and private securities world. That direct experience, got me to the point where I was organizing the fund for the clients for the company that ended up suing me, and then getting into private markets, which is what ended up launching my career in the private world, right? And then I ended up learning how to invest in real estate, okay, and very quickly, because I acquired so many properties so quickly. Another one was knowing how to do that. I was able to organize that investment in that fourplex that I told you about that we almost bankrupted ourselves with, and that improved my life to the tune of an increase in cash flow of, call it, $60,000 a year on top of my other efforts, and making close to $500,000 total on that investment over call it a 7-year period. And that is why I was able to spend winters away and, build my business and not be under too much pressure to do it, because I had income from properties in the US and properties in Canada. Then I bought multiple properties in the Kelowna area and was able to hold those, and in a very short period of time was making, close to $1 million on the gain in equity on those alone in just a few years, right? Timing and holding at the right time. So I guess what I would say is that the advice that I would give myself back in 2001, when I was 18, is hold period. That you don't have to jump from one good idea to the next and hope that you time it correctly. You should put yourself into a position where if you think something is a good idea, you put the money in there and you have the ability to wait and do something else. And that's perfectly summarized in the experience I had just this past April, when I had invested in a company called Charge a Card. This was a blockchain company. In 2017, December, we invested. The long story short is that right after I invested, the company basically almost went belly up, lost 80 to 90% of its value. And because I was in a position not to have to sell, what I did was I sold it, because I invested in it privately. I sold it privately. Sorry, when it went public, I sold it out of my non-registered account and I put it in my TFSA. It was only $4,000. And I just let it sit there and sit there and sit there and sit there and sit there. And for the record, I learned in the CFP course, by the way, that if I sold it, waited 30 days and bought it in my TFSA, it was no longer what's considered a superficial loss, and I could move it into my TFSA. So I could write off the loss personally and write off the loss against future capital gains that are in non-registered accounts. I know I'm speaking technical language. Basically, I got the benefit of the loss, and then if it went back up in the TFSA, I get the benefit of the gain. And so that particular company, I'm looking I'm looking at my my portfolio on my phone. I'm having breakfast on a patio in like March because it's still COVID.
Yep.
And I'm like, it's gone up over 20 times that week, that particular holding in
Wow.
my TFSA. And I was like, that's good timing because I need to build a deck. Pulled it out tax free.
That's awesome.
$80,000 gain. And took 4 years. It was only supposed to take 4 months. Took 4 years, but I learned the lesson. If you don't need to sell it, don't sell it. Because if it was a good idea then, it's still a good idea now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hold period.
What about if someone hadn't had the experience that you had in their 20s and were just, let's take it, because I know that you were very specific on the advice that you give, so I really do appreciate it. But let's say like an average person that had gone to college, they've traveled a little bit, they've worked throughout their 20s, what could they do through their 30s and 40s to help them set themselves up for like a good retirement?
What could, sorry, redefine that. What could someone in their 20s and 30s do
No,
to set themselves up for a good retirement? Is that what you're asking?
no. So I asked the question like, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self to set you up for that decade of your 20s?
Mm-hmm.
And I think personally, I know that you are ahead of the curve and you were at that age as well. But I just wanted to know, for someone who isn't ahead of the curve, maybe just
Mm-hmm.
the average person that had gone to high school, graduated, gone to college, graduated, have traveled, have bought a house, have got a partner. Let's say it's pre-kids, and now they're in their 30s, like early 30s. What can they do in their 30s to
Mm-hmm.
help set them up for a better retirement? So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay, well, it's a difficult one to answer
I know.
because it is so individual in
Yeah,
nature. But I
I
will
know.
tell you this, okay? If you are employed, i.e., you have a job
Hmm.
and you don't intend on running your own business, the first piece of advice I would say is, if you're at that age and you're in the position to start your own business, and there is one that you want to run and you have the ability to, and you're considering it, do it, because it is almost invariably going to not only just make you more money but also develop you more as a person, because it's going to challenge you more. Right?
Mm.
The best way to wealth creation, one of the best ways you can go, is having control of your own income. Okay, there's no two ways about it, because no one's going to pay you as much as you will pay yourself. Okay, no one's going to work as hard for you as you will yourself. So having control will not only give you the control of your income, but your control of your life in ways that you never thought. So I would strongly consider personal financial autonomy in terms of being the income generating source of your own life. Okay, so that's one aspect. Now, let's just say we're talking about the other 80 to 90% of people who aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
There are things that you can do. So and this is where it gets a little bit individualistic, but it may kind of parallel what my advice I just gave. But if you are in Canada, I'm going to speak to a Canadian audience right now. If you're in Canada, having some ability to be self-employment, to have a side hustle, something that you can claim write-offs on, would be very beneficial.
Mm.
Doing that very small thing would enable you to reduce your tax bill by probably 20 to 30% off the bat. You will spend no more money on nothing more than taxes in your life. So if you can reduce the amount of taxes you can that you will pay, $7,000 to $10,000, $15,000 a year, because you have a side hustle, and you can write off your fuel, you can write off your exorbitant Canadian cell phone bill, your exorbitant Canadian internet bill, or
Yep.
have a home office, or your insurance for your vehicle, or the expenses to repair your vehicle, or whatever, right? You can write off all of those things. you're immediately, by zero effort, immediately putting money in your pocket right away. Not to mention the fact that if you have a side hustle, that you can have another source of income, right? And having multiple streams of income is also an important thing, right? So that's the first thing. The other thing that I would recommend people do is seriously look at making yourself putting yourself on a passive investment model, right? So I'm not recommending anyone go and become an expert in finance. If you only went to something like wealthsimple.com, put $100 a week into an account there, figured out what your risk level was, and paid 0.5% for an automatic strategy that just runs, then you'll probably do better than 90% of people out there. I mean, I started doing that in 2017 when I had my third child because I wasn't in a position before that. And like that accounts over $20,000 now. And I didn't even notice it. Like I literally didn't even notice the money coming out. Right now, that may not be you, but the point is that one way or the other is very important to learn the the importance of compounding returns and low fees. Like I wrote the first book, the chapter 5 of that book is central on that point because Canadian fees are so high to go and invest in regular funds, right? Average of over 2%, and you can get it for less than 0.5% there. The impact that that will have over 30 years of savings is incredible. I encourage anyone to learn how that dynamic works because that is absolutely like it'll make your life so much easier if you understand that concept, and it takes 5 minutes to learn it, right? And then implementing that concept of compounding returns with low fees through a company like Wealthsimple, it's absolutely the best advice I could give anyone. And just every once in a while find someone who knows some more about money than you do and ask them questions to fill in the gaps.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good start. And I just want to finish on what skills do you possess now, Mark? Do you wish you would learn earlier in life?
Honestly, I think that if I had a skill that I could have possessed earlier, or even one that I would wish to better develop now, the ability to balance, take on multiple different things at one time in my life. So I kind of liken this to spinning plates, right? The circus performers that spin plates.
Yeah,
Um,
on the little pegs
yeah,
on the poles. Yep.
yeah, yeah. My life, I find, is very much like that because in my main categories are, my faith, my family, and my work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I find that I can really only focus on two of them at a time.
Got it.
Um,
Yep.
and you can subcategorize that down into like the side hustles I have going on, making a little bit of money down here, working with a company that's contracted me for stuff, and I still got my primary business back in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
right? I've got an assistant or an associate now that's fully licensed that I need to train to make sure that he can take over some of the things that I'm doing. I've got a partner that takes care of relationship. I've got, but then I've got my kids and I've got
Yeah.
their need to have me around. And I'll tell you right now, I did not have the time, or at least I didn't think, to coach my kids' football team. Like I signed up to be their head coach before we even lived in the city that we're in. We were in the middle of moving,
I love it.
right? But it wouldn't have happened unless I did it.
Yeah.
So I have to find the time to do that. And then, by the way, I've also got to keep some sort of relationship with my wife so that in 20 years, when the kids are up and gone, we still know who each other are,
100%. Yeah, I think that's a
right?
huge one.
So like the stretches and strains on your time so that you can build in development and faith, and make sure you have that guiding principle going, and then you develop with your wife and you develop with your kids, and you have your work business going on, your side hustle, and then to make sure to take time to decompress and relieve stress through all of that. Like there's a lot going on, especially when you have a newborn at home
Mm.
and you're not sleeping properly, the kids are acting up, like not being short with them because you can understand why they're acting up because they didn't sleep well or whatever, they're sick, or like you just have to be able to roll with things. So remember when I was saying when I was young, I had so many siblings. I was the only one, and this actually started when I was very, very young, like 3 or 4 years old. One of my earliest memories is being given my own room because I couldn't stand the mess that my two brothers were making in theirs.
Hmm.
Right? I was 4 years old.
Yep.
Okay. When I got married, my wife will dispute this, but when I got married and we started living together, that same thing was coming back, right? Like it drove me crazy. Like if you saw the state of my kitchen right now, okay? But the ability to be adaptable and to roll with what wasn't your plan when you woke up, because I would tell you 90% of the time, the plan that I have when I open my eyes, by the time I hit that bottom stair, it's already changed. Okay. And for someone who is very left-brained, analytical, militaristic in their precision, to get to this point where I come downstairs and be like, oh, sink is leaking, baby's crying, need to drive the kids to school, da 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 da. Like, you just have to adapt. You have to roll with it and just like dance through life. Just dance through it. Don't get too attached to any one thing. Just dance through it. Didn't get too attached to Canada. Didn't get too attached to, this or that and the other, or working in a particular role in a particular way. Just dance through it and
Yeah.
be able to like smoothly transition and adapt and just roll with the punches. That is a skill that I wish I had earlier because it would have caused a lot less friction, honestly, with my wife.
Yeah, I call that variable change.
Yeah.
And you could say even adapting to variable change, because if it wasn't for variable change, I would say Mama G and me probably would have never have met. So I'm sincerely grateful for that. So
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I can't thank you enough for your time this morning. I hold you in such the highest regard, not only in our professional dealings, but personally as well. So I really appreciate your time. I really hope anyone that has hung around for as long as you and I have spoken gets value from the content that we've discussed. And I look forward to catching up at some stage, whether that's in the great country of the United States or back in Canada here.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to seeing you. And next time you're through Dallas, schedule a layover and I'll come down and meet you at the airport.
That sounds good. That sounds definitely like a plan. Thank you again for your time, Mark.
All right. Take care. You have a good day, Mark.
You too. Bye.